The file is designated as an absolute anomaly, a digital scar on the history of American telecommunications that was supposedly erased from every federal ledger. In the early morning hours of October 14, 1984, a classified event occurred that defied every known law of signal encryption and broadcast physics. It was not a glitch. It was not a prank. It was an unauthorized, high-definition override of the national airwaves that hit 4 million homes simultaneously across the Midwestern United States. For exactly 12 minutes, the standard, late-night static of the Reagan era was replaced by something else's signal so complex, so deeply encrypted, that modern NSA analysts still struggled to decipher its origin point. Witnesses described a hidden truth appearing on their screens, a series of mathematical coordinates flashing behind a veil of gray-blue flickering light. Every record of this broadcast was systematically hunted and destroyed by government contractors within 48 hours. Every magnetic tape, every station log, and every consumer recording was confiscated under the guise of a national security audit. This was a total information wipe, an attempt to bury a mass-scale psychological anomaly under layers of steel and silence. The survivors speak of a phantom sound, a low-frequency hum that lingered in their homes for weeks after the screen went dark. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The air in the archive is unnervingly still. The only sound is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a mechanical heartbeat in the dark. The file folder in front of us is cold to the touch, its heavy cardstock yellowed by decades of concealment, and the ink has faded with secrets that were never meant to breathe. As we peel back the first layer of the redacted report, a faint smell of ozone and old paper rises. There is a sense of quiet dread here, an intellectual weight that settles in the chest. We are looking at the 3:14 a.m. signal, a moment when the quiet safety of the American home was punctured by a frequency from the unseen. The incident began at precisely 3 hours, 14 minutes and 7 seconds Eastern Standard Time. At that moment, the signal towers in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois experienced a localized power surge that should have, by all technical accounts, fried the internal circuitry. Instead, the towers began to pulse. They weren't transmitting the scheduled end-of-day test patterns or the snowy static of a dead channel. They were broadcasting a 14 GHz signal, a frequency that the television sets of 1984 were physically incapable of receiving. And yet, every television set turned on, even those that were unplugged. Imagine the quiet suburbs of 1984, the wood-paneled living rooms, the heavy cathode ray tube television sets sitting silent in the corner. Suddenly, the glass begins to glow. It isn't the warm amber glow of a late-night movie. It is a piercing, cold blue lighter color that some researchers called Cherenkov blue, the color of radioactive water. It illuminates the room with a clinical, steel-like intensity. The sound that accompanied the visual was described as a bioacoustic pressure. It wasn't something you heard with your ears. It was something you felt in your teeth, a resonance that vibrated the very calcium in the viewer's bones. Those who were awake shift workers, insomniacs, parents tending to crying infants found themselves paralyzed. They weren't frozen by fear, but by a neurological lock. The signal was communicating directly with the motor cortex, bypassing the sensory organs entirely. When we examine the declassified engineering logs from the Mason City broadcast hub, the data becomes even more unsettling. The engineers on duty reported that the equipment was operating without a power source. The needles on the analog gauges were pinned to the far right, vibrating so hard they eventually snapped off. One technician, whose name remains redacted in the blue folder, noted that the signals seemed to be drawing energy from the ambient air. In the world of signal processing, this is considered a physical impossibility. A broadcast requires a transmitter, a medium, and a power source. The 3:14 a.m. signal appeared to lack all three. It was a phantom broadcast, a self-sustaining wave that used the existing infrastructure as a mere suggestion rather than a requirement. The visual content of the broadcast was equally baffling. It wasn't a message in English or any known human language. It was a visual representation of a non-Euclidean geometry shapes that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, rotating with a fluid hypnotic grace. Behind these shapes, a scrolling list of names appeared, names of people who hadn't been born yet, names of people who would vanish in the years to come. It was a ledger of the future, broadcast into a past that wasn't ready to see it. One specific file in the archive stands out: the case of the Miller family in suburban Columbus, Ohio. According to the recovered police report, which was later intercepted and classified by the Department of Energy, the Millers' television set didn't just broadcast the signal, it transformed the room. When the local authorities arrived at 3:45 a.m., alerted by a neighbor who saw the Serenkov blue light screaming through the miller's windows, they found the front door unlocked. Inside, the temperature had dropped to exactly 42 degrees Fahrenheit, despite it being a humid October night. The television was still glowing, but the screen was no longer glass. It had become a translucent, gelatinous membrane. The father, Thomas Miller, was found sitting 3 feet from the screen, his eyes wide, his pupils dilated to the point where no iris was visible. He was unresponsive to touch or sound. When the officers tried to turn off the television, the light pulsed, and a sound like a heavy steel door slamming echoed through the house. Thomas Miller finally spoke, but the voice wasn't his. He whispered a string of numbers coordinates for a location in the high Arctic that, at the time, was marked on all maps as unexplored ice. By 4 a.m., the static silence protocol was initiated. This was a pre-authorized high-level directive designed for unrecoverable cultural anomalies. Within minutes, blacked-out transport trucks were moving through the suburbs. Men in heavy lined suits entered homes under the guise of emergency gas leak inspections. Their objective was singular: the hardware. They weren't there to save the people. They were there to seize the television sets. Any device that had been exposed to the 3:14 a.m. signal was considered biologically contaminated. Sets were hauled away in leak containers and taken to a facility in West Virginia, place the archives refer to as the concrete void. This facility was a decommissioned limestone mine that had been converted into a massive underground tomb. Thousands of television sets were stacked in rows, their screens still faintly humming with the residual energy of the signal. The government didn't try to study them at first. They simply poured 400 tons of high-grade industrial cement over the entire sub-level, sealing the 3:14 a.m. signal in a tomb of stone. They were afraid that the signal wasn't finished. They were afraid it was waiting for an answer. The 4 million Americans who witnessed the event were left with what psychiatrists now call the frequency scar. In the weeks following the wipe, reports of phantom sounds skyrocketed. People claimed they could hear the signal coming from their refrigerators, their radiators, even the wind through the trees. It was a low-level auditory hallucination that seemed to follow the geography of the original broadcast. In the archives, we find interviews with survivors from the 1990s. They describe a sense of unbelonging, as if the signal had edited their perception of reality. One woman, a librarian from Indiana, claimed that after the broadcast, she could no longer see the color green the same way. To her, trees looked like smoldering ash, and the sky felt paper-thin. This is the hidden danger of the 3:14 a.m. signal. It wasn't just a broadcast, it was a subtle shift in the human operating system. The NSA analysts who studied the few surviving audio fragments leaked by a dying engineer in 2012 discovered that the signal contained primers. These are frequencies below the range of human hearing that are designed to trigger specific emotional states. The 3:14 a.m. signal was tuned to intellectual submission. It was designed to make the population more receptive to a specific type of logic that doesn't originate on this earth. That as we turn the final pages of this section of the archive, the dread becomes more modern, more immediate. With the advent of digital smart homes and always-on internet connectivity, the static silence tomb in West Virginia is no longer enough. In 2024, data miners discovered a ghost packet circulating on the dark web. It was a file that had no source and no destination, yet it occupied exactly 3.14 megabytes of space. When researchers opened the file in a controlled, air-gapped environment, the monitor flickered. The cold Serenkov blue light returned. The signal has found a way out of the concrete. It no longer needs massive broadcast towers or cathode ray tubes. It lives in the Internet of Things. It waits in the smart speakers, the digital thermostats, and the high-definition displays that surround us in our sleep. The archive suggests that the 1984 incident was merely a calibration test to see how the human brain would handle the primary upload. The file for the 3:14 a.m. signal remains active. It is a living document, a warning that the airwaves we trust are far more fragile than we believe. We have looked at the broadcast that hit 4 million homes. But the story of the 1980s frequency wars is only beginning. Deep within the same archive, under a different classification, lies the answer to what the government did next. While they were burying the television sets in West Virginia, they were also tracking a specific group of people, the ones who didn't just see the signal, but began to transmit it back. This leads us directly to the next level of the cover-up. The light in the server room flickers again. A faint, digital static begins to bleed through the audio monitors. We are moving deeper into the vault now. toward a set of documents that explain why certain names appeared on that screen back in 1984. The next file is labeled Entry 88 Alpha, and it contains the leaked transcripts that the NSA killed to keep secret. In the deep archives of the National Security Agency, tucked away within a server farm that technically doesn't exist on any public map, there sits a digital anomaly known only as File Entry 88 Alpha. This is not a standard intelligence report. It is a raw, decrypted transcript of a signal intercepted at a Maryland station in the late winter of 1988. A signal that should have been physically impossible to capture. For 30 years, every mention of 88 Alpha was systematically erased from federal databases, and the engineers who processed the audio were reassigned to remote, non-classified roles before being quietly retired. Hidden truth contained within these 17 pages of text suggests that the Maryland intercept station didn't pick up a foreign transmission or a satellite glitch. Instead, they caught a leak from another layer of reality. The encrypted data, once broken, revealed a conversation occurring in a frequency range usually reserved for deep space black holes. It was a rhythmic, mathematical dialogue that spoke of the architecture of the quiet. When the first internal memo was filed, it was immediately pulled by a high-level courier. There were no copies made. There were no digital backups allowed. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this high-security vault is the quiet hum of the server room, a low-frequency vibration that feels like it's coming from under the floorboards. The air here is unnaturally still, recycled and filtered until it carries no scent of the outside world. On the monitor, a single cursor blinks against a dark terminal screen, waiting. The file itself is cold to the touch, or at least the terminal housing. It feels chilled. As the decryption keys finally slot into place, the text begins to faded, digital ink that carries the weight of secrets meant to stay buried in the Maryland soil. There is a sense of quiet dread as the first line of the transcript appears. The Maryland Intercept Station, located in a dense, wooded area near the Patuxent River, was designed to listen to the whispers of the world. In 1988, its arrays were some of the most sensitive on the planet, but on the night of February 12th, the arrays didn't look outward. They looked down. The technicians reported a ground loop feedback that was so intense it threatened to melt the cooling systems. When they isolated the source, they found it wasn't a malfunction. It was a broadcast originating from 4 miles beneath the station's own foundations. The transcript labeled 88 Alpha begins with a series of timestamps that shouldn't exist. The clock on the intercept equipment began to move backward, recording events at AM and AM. The first recorded dialogue is not between two people, but between two sources identified only as Source A and Source B. Source A speaks in a series of prime numbers translated into phony. Source B responds in a tone that the transcript describes as structurally hollow. As we read through the first 3 pages, the intellectual curiosity turns into a cold reflection. The entities, or whatever they were discussing the integrity of the skin. They weren't talking about human anatomy. They were talking about the atmosphere of the planet. They referred to the sky as a temporary curtain and discussed the precise moment the curtain would need to be drawn back. The tone of the narration here is analytical, detached. We are looking at a document that treats the end of the world as a routine maintenance task. The Maryland station wasn't just hearing a secret. They were eavesdropping on a cosmic blueprint. The dread comes not from what is said, but from the calm, bureaucratic way it is communicated. The entities speak with the authority of architects discussing a building that is scheduled for demolition. To understand the severity of File Entry 88, one must understand the state of Maryland's intelligence infrastructure in the late 80s. The station was a hub for the Echelon Project, a global network for intercepting electronic communications. Every phone call, every fax and every radio transmission was filtered through these banks. But 88 Alpha didn't use electrons. It used neutrino pathing, a technology that humans wouldn't even begin to theorize for another 2 decades. The transcript reveals that at 3 a.m., the signal strength increased by 400%. This is where the document becomes truly unsettling. The Source B entity begins to describe a specific location in Maryland, coordinates point that matches exactly where the station was standing. It tells Source A that the listeners are awake. They are recording the quiet. The technicians at the station reported that at that exact moment, the temperature inside the intercept room dropped to near freezing. The magnetic tapes began to spin so fast, they turned into a blur of silver. One engineer, a man named Marcus Vane, reportedly took off his headset and walked out of the room, refusing to ever speak of the incident again. His personnel file was later marked with a permanent redaction stamp. In the middle of the transcript, there is a section titled The Geometric Leak. It is a series of descriptions of shapes that the intercept equipment attempted to render. The software crashed repeatedly, but the printer's standard dot matrix model of the era began to output pages of pure black ink. When the pages were held up to the light, they revealed a series of intricate, overlapping circles that formed a map of the Chesapeake Bay. But it wasn't a map of the bay as it existed in 1988. It was a map of the bay as it will look in the year 2045, showing coastlines that have been completely redrawn by rising tides. The dread in the archive is now palpable. We are no longer just looking at a secret conversation. We are looking at a prophecy captured by a machine that didn't know how to lie. The transcript notes that Source A replied to the map with a single phrase: "The calibration is complete. The harvest of the quiet can begin." What does it mean to harvest the quiet? The archival researchers have spent years debating this. Some believe it refers to a neurological suppression, a way to silence the human collective consciousness to prepare for a rewrite. Others believe it is more literal, that the signal was a way to drain the very energy of the atmosphere, leaving behind a cold, silent void where a vibrant world once existed. By 5 a.m. on that February morning, the signal vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The Maryland station was plunged into a total blackout. Every piece of hardware was fried. The blue folder containing the raw tapes was seized by a rapid response team from Fort Meade within 60 minutes. The official explanation was a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse test conducted by a nearby military base. But the personnel knew better. They had heard the hollow tone of Source B. File entry 88. Alpha was buried so deep that it took a literal act of digital archaeology to recover these fragments. The transcript ends with a series of technical warnings from the original security officers. They noted that anyone who read more than 10 pages of the document reported a persistent ringing in their ears, a ringing that matched the frequency of the harvest. We look at the redacted signatures at the bottom of page 17. They belong to men who no longer exist in the Social Security Index. Their lives were erased to protect the hidden truth that the Maryland station didn't just listen, it was listened to. The entities beneath the ground knew we were there. They knew we were recording, and according to the final line of the transcript, they found our curiosity amusing. The calm, archival nature of this discovery is what makes it so terrifying. It isn't a jump scare. It is a slow realization that the floor beneath our feet is not as solid as we think. The intercept station was built on a foundation of secrets, and 88 Alpha is the crack in that foundation. As we reflect on the leaked data, we realize that the Maryland incident wasn't an isolated event. It was a bridge between the archival past and a future that is already being written in the frequencies of the quiet. The documentary-style evidence points to a massive, coordinated effort to keep the American public from realizing that their own intelligence agencies are, essentially, zookeepers for a force they cannot control. The most disturbing aspect of file entry 88 is not what happened in 1988, but what is happening now. In 2024, a series of seismic sensors in the same area of Maryland began to record a rhythmic pulse. It is identical to the frequency captured in the 88 Alpha transcript. The pulse is getting stronger. The archive suggests that the harvest mentioned by Source A was not a one-time event. It was a scheduled cycle, and if the map of the Chesapeake Bay is any indication, the next phase of the cycle is due to begin very soon. The hidden truth is that the intercept station was never meant to protect us. It was meant to monitor the skin of our reality until it was time for it to be drawn back. We are left with the intellectual dread of knowing that our history is being managed by entities that view us as nothing more than ambient noise. The 88 Alpha file is a testament to our own insignificance in the face of the architecture of the quiet. The Maryland station is now a hollow shell, its arrays rusted and its halls empty, but the signal it caught is still echoing in the deep layers of the earth. The archival records show that the harvest is preceded by a period of unnatural calm, a time when the world feels still, and the air feels thin, a time much like tonight. We sit in the cold light of the monitor reading the words of Source B, realizing that the decryption was not a victory. It was an invitation. As we prepare to close this chapter of the archive, we must ask ourselves, what else did they catch? What other transcripts are sitting in the black site servers, waiting for the decryption keys to turn? The Maryland station was just one point on a global grid, a grid that is currently pulsing with a frequency we were never meant to hear. The file on 88 Alpha is thick with technical jargon and redacted names, but the core message is clear. We are not alone, but we are also not being visited. We are being managed. and the manager is losing patience with our recordings. The server hum is now a roar in our ears, a reminder that some secrets are buried. Because they are still alive, we have decoded the transcript from the Maryland intercept station. But file entry 88 alpha is only one piece of the puzzle. The entities mentioned, a gray noise phenomenon that would follow the harvest, a specific type of cognitive dissonance that would affect millions of listeners across the country. The air in the archive has grown even colder. The monitor flickers one last time, revealing a hidden directory titled the Gray Noise Protocol. It seems that the signal caught in Maryland was just the beginning. The next level of the conspiracy involves a deliberate broadcast designed to alter the very way we perceive the world around us. We are not closing the file. We are turning the page. The transcript told us that the harvest had begun, but the next document tells us how it was implemented. We are moving from the intercept station to the broadcast towers. We are moving from the listeners to the victims. The quiet hum of the room is being replaced by a low, rhythmic static. It is a sound that feels familiar, like a dream you can't quite remember. It is the sound of the world being rewritten, one frequency at a time. The next file is labeled the Gray Noise Phenomenon, and it explains why thousands of people reported the same nightmare on the same night in the winter of 1989. On the morning of December 14, 1989, a classified internal memo began circulating within the upper echelons of the Department of Health and Human Services. It didn't contain a virus report or a policy change. Instead, it was a request for immediate containment of a psychological anomaly that had gripped the northeast corridor of the United States. For 3 consecutive nights, thousands of citizens independent of one another had reported the exact same nightmare. This was not a coincidence. This was the first measurable result of an encrypted broadcast that would later be identified in the National Archives as the Gray Noise Protocol. The file was nearly erased in the 1990 purge, but fragments survived in a forgotten backup at a facility in Maryland. This hidden truth reveals that the broadcast was not a glitch in the national radio spectrum, but a targeted cognitive experiment. The gray noise was a specific frequency, a 12-minute wash of acoustic static that sat at the exact resonance of the human amygdala. It bypassed the conscious mind and spoke directly to the dreaming subconscious. Those who heard it didn't just sleep, they were transported to a location that seemed to exist outside of time. Every witness described a city of ash, a sky of lead, and a presence that watched from the shadows of a doorless room. The data suggests that for 12 minutes, 4 million people shared a single, simulated reality. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room. It is a mechanical breath, cold and indifferent to the weight of the data it carries. The file is cold to the touch, the heavy cardstock stiff from years of archival storage, and the ink has faded with secrets that were meant to be drowned in silence. As we scroll through the recovered logs of Project Morpheus, a single cursor blinks on the terminal, a heartbeat in the dark. The air in the archive is thin, smelling of ozone and old dust. There is a quiet dread in knowing that the static we hear between radio stations might not be empty at all. It might be a doorway. In the winter of 1989, the American Northeast was gripped by a record-breaking cold snap. People stayed indoors, huddled around their televisions and radios, seeking the warmth of late-night talk shows and familiar music. But at 2:14 a.m. on the night of December 11th, the signal changed. It began as a faint, textured hisser sound like rain on a tin roof or the rustle of dry leaves in a vacant lot. Most listeners assumed it was an atmospheric interference caused by the solar flares reported earlier that week. They didn't turn their radios off. They let the sound wash over them as they drifted into sleep. The reports started coming into local police stations and sleep clinics by 7 a.m. It wasn't a trickle. It was a flood. People in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia were calling in, terrified, describing a shared memory. They weren't using the word dream, they were using the word visit. In the archives, we find the intake logs from the Princeton Sleep Center. One patient, a 42-year-old high school teacher with no history of parasomnia, described the experience with haunting precision. He said the static on his bedside radio didn't just fade, it expanded, it became a physical space. He found himself standing in the center of what he called a gray city. There were no colors, only varying shades of slate and charcoal. The buildings were made of a substance that looked like concrete but felt like cold skin. There were no windows, and more importantly, there were no doors. He described a sky that was a solid, motionless slab of gray cloud, emitting a light that cast no shadows. And he wasn't alone. He saw thousands of other people, all standing perfectly still, staring at the sky. They were all wearing the clothes they had gone to sleep in. They were all waiting for something. The archive. Chill researchers have spent months cross-referencing these reports with declassified acoustic studies from the Cold War era. What they found was a project codenamed Morpheus. The goal of the project was to utilize binaural to induce a state of collective dreaming by broadcasting two slightly different frequencies. At 8.7 Hz and another at 11.2 Hz, the human brain can be forced into a deep REM state while remaining susceptible to external auditory suggestions. The gray noise was the carrier wave for these suggestions. It wasn't containing words. It was containing spatial data. The brain was being fed the coordinates of a virtual architecture. This is why the witnesses all described the same city. They weren't dreaming of their own lives. They were being forced to render a government-designed simulation. The intellectual curiosity here is found in the why. Why would the NSA spend millions of dollars to send 4 million Americans to a gray doorless city for 12 minutes? The answer lies in page 42 of the 88 alpha file we decoded previously. The harvest of the quiet required a baseline for human reaction. The gray city was a testing ground. It was a way to see how the human psyche would react to a total loss of agency. In that city, you couldn't move your legs. You couldn't speak. You could only watch as the sky began to pulse with a low, rhythmic light. The same light that Thomas Miller saw in his living room in Ohio. Deep within the Maryland backup, there is a specific audio recording, an interview with a woman identified only as Subject 109. She was a nurse in Manhattan who had been listening to a jazz station when the gray noise began. Her testimony is the most detailed account of the presence in the city. She describes walking, though she couldn't feel her feet, toward a large, monolithic structure in the center of the gray plaza. She claimed that as she got closer, she realized the building wasn't a building at all. It was a massive, upright filing cabinet, stretching miles into the gray sky. Millions of drawers were clicking open and shut in a rhythmic pattern that matched the static of the radio. She said she felt an overwhelming sense of grief, a reflection of every lost memory and erased life in human history. And then, she saw him, the archivist of the gray. He was a figure standing near the base of the monolith, dressed in a suit of the same steel gray color as the sky. He had no face, only a smooth, reflective surface where a visage should be. He was holding a ledger. As she watched, he reached out and touched a woman standing near Subject 109. The woman didn't scream. She simply turned into ash and was blown away by a wind that didn't exist. The archivist then looked at Subject 109 and whispered a single word: redacted. The technical data in the file indicates that the gray noise wasn't just broadcast over the airwaves. It was also found to be vibrating through the power lines. This is a modern paradox. How can a sound travel through electricity? The researchers discovered that the high-voltage transformers in the suburbs were being used as mechanical speakers. The very walls of the houses were vibrating at the 8.7 Hz frequency. This meant that even if you turned off your radio, you were still being bathed in the frequency. It was inescapable. The Archive Chill Collective believes this is why the retention of the dream was so high. The frequency was being delivered through multiple sensory paths: auditory, tactile, and even visual, through the subtle flicker of the light bulbs. This was a total environment saturation. The cold, analytical reality of this experiment is that it was a success. The government proved that they could synchronize the brainwaves of a massive population. They proved that they could create a shared hallucination that felt more real than the world outside. The gray noise wasn't a failure. It was a prototype. It was the first step in creating a controlled subconscious. By December 15th, the gray noise vanished. The radio stations returned to their normal programming. The police reports were collected by special task forces and vanished. The people who had experienced the gray city were told it was a mass sociogenic illness, a fancy term for mass hysteria caused by the stress of the cold winter and the fear of the late 80s economy, but the scars remained. In the years following 1989, the suicide rate in the Northeast among those who reported the nightmare increased by 300%. They couldn't adjust back to a world of color. They spent their days looking at the sky, waiting for it to turn leaden and solid. They were gray addicts, people whose brains had been permanently tuned to the frequency of the simulation. The archive contains a final note from a whistleblower who worked on Project Morpheus. He wrote, "We didn't just give them a nightmare, we gave them a home they can never go back to. We took the quiet and we shaped it into a prison. And the most terrifying part is, the prison doors are still open. We just haven't played the static loud enough yet." As we sit in the archive today, in 2026, the gray noise is no longer a relic of 1989 with the rise of white noise, machines and sleep aid apps. The infrastructure for a second gray noise event is already in place. Millions of people willingly play hours of synthesized static in their bedrooms every night. They are essentially opening the door and inviting the frequency. The archive chill has analyzed several popular sleep apps and found subaudible clusters that match the 8.7 Hz frequency from the Maryland file. The hidden truth is that the experiment never ended. It just went private. It moved from the radio towers to the smartphones on our night. The gray city is still there, waiting. If you've ever woken up from a dream feeling a sense of quiet dread, or if you've ever felt like the sky was a bit too thin, you might have already visited. The gray noise was the weapon, but the implementation required a different kind of silence. To truly test the limits of the gray city, the government needed a location that was already isolated, a place where they could observe the effects of the frequency without any interference from the outside world. The air in the archive has grown heavy, almost thick with the scent of wet concrete. The monitor flickers, and a new file appears. It is a map of a small, nondescript town in the Midwest, a town that, according to census records, shouldn't exist. In 1990, every resident of this town stopped speaking. They didn't go mute. They simply chose silence. The file was never meant to be released. In early 2024, during a massive, court-ordered declassification dump of over 4 million National Security Agency documents, a digital anomaly occurred that briefly bypassed the standard redaction algorithms. For a window of exactly 48 seconds, a directory appeared on a public-facing server that was not supposed to exist. It was an encrypted repository labeled simply as the blue folder. While the majority of the public was distracted by redacted political memos, one rogue archivist working in a cold, steel-lined basement in Northern Virginia to mirror the data before it was erased by a high-priority federal kill switch. What he found inside was the hidden truth of the last 60 years of American history. It wasn't a collection of old letters or policy debates. It was a live, self-updating ledger of the frequencies we've been tracking: the 3:14 a.m. signal, the Maryland intercept, and the Suburban Silence protocols. But there was a more terrifying modern paradox inside. The blue folder contained a roster of names: your neighbors, your colleagues, and perhaps even you, marked with a biological status code that suggests the gray noise wasn't a dream, but a permanent installation. The archivist realized that the files were not a record of the past, but a schedule for a future that has already begun. The file was stamped "never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room. It is a mechanical breath that feels ancient and indifferent. The air here is thin and cold, chilled to exactly 62 degrees to preserve the integrity of the hardware. On the high-definition monitor, the flickering blue light reflects off the steel architecture of the workstation, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. The file is cold to the touch, or at least, the digital weight of it feels freezing. The ink on the scanned documents has faded with secrets, some obscured by heavy black bars, others left visible as if to taunt whoever finds them. We are diving into the heart of the archive, where the line between history and horror is blurred by the blue glow of the screen. The archivist, whom we shall identify only as Elias, spent his life in the quiet corners of data management. He was a man of steel and silicon, comfortable in the silence of classified vaults. When the 2024 dump occurred, he was not looking for grand conspiracies. He was looking for discrepancies, more mathematical errors in the file headers that indicate a forced deletion. On the night of the discovery, the monitor flicker was the only companion he had. As Elias navigated the directory tree of the NSA's Project Morpheus leftovers, he noticed a hidden packet. It was a 1.2 gigabyte file that had no metadata. In the world of archival research, a file without metadata is a ghost. It shouldn't exist. When he bypassed the initial encryption layer, he didn't find text. He found a visual rendering of a facility, a steel architecture buried deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains. The documents within the blue folder were categorized by frequency resonance. Page 1 was a technical manual for the 1984 broadcast. It detailed how the 3:14 a.m. signal was not broadcast from a tower, but reflected off the ionosphere using a classified satellite array. The intellectual curiosity of the document was staggering. It described the human brain as a receiver that had been poorly tuned for centuries. The goal of the frequency was to realign the antenna. Elias scrolled deeper, his breath hitching in the cold air. He found the roster. This was the most unsettling discovery in the 2024 dump. The roster contained millions of entries, each one a social security number followed by a blue status indicator. A blue status meant the individual had a 98% resonance with the gray noise. They were tuned. The dread began to settle in Ilias's chest as he realized the scale of the operation. This wasn't a small experiment in Ohio or Maryland. This was a continental grid. The blue folder contained maps of resonance nodes, hidden transmitters disguised as cell towers, water heaters, and even the internal wiring of modern smart appliances. The hidden truth was that the silence protocol wasn't a localized event. It was a test of the global standby system. The documents explained that the blue designation referred to the Serenka flight we discussed in earlier files. Those with blue status would eventually be able to see the frequency. They would see the world not in its natural colors, but in the steel gray and cold blue hues of the simulation. They were being prepared for what the file called the Great Transition. Elias sat back in his chair, the steel architecture of the room feeling like a cage. He began to reflect on his own life. Had he ever seen the blue flicker? Had he ever heard the faint static when the world went quiet? He searched his own name in the database. He found himself on page 4802, status blue, date of alignment, November 12, 1990, the day of the Suburban Silence. He realized that his entire career as an archivist, his obsession with classified files, and his comfort in the cold dark were all part of the programming. He wasn't discovering the archive. The archive was calling him home. This is the hypnotic nature of the blue folder. It doesn't just provide information, it provides an identity. It tells you that the anomalies you've noticed in your life, the lost time, the shared nightmares, the feeling that the sky is a screen are all valid. You are not losing your mind. You are simply being upgraded. The academic tone of the documents made the horror feel like a promotion. It was a cold, logical progression from human to aligned assets. The blue folder contained architectural blueprints for a facility known as the Anchor. This was a massive, subterranean complex built entirely of non-conductive steel. It was designed to be the master transmitter. According to the 2024 data, the Anchor is located exactly beneath a major American city, though the specific name was redacted with a high-level digital mask. The blueprints showed rows upon rows of sleeper cells, small, steel-lined rooms where blue status individuals could be housed during the transition. The rooms were described as acoustically perfect, meaning no sound from the outside world could penetrate. Inside these cells, the only thing the inhabitants would hear is the quiet. Elias realized that the gray city from the 1989 nightmares wasn't a dream. It was a digital twin of the Anchor. The government had been using the gray noise to train the population to navigate the facility before it was even finished. Intellectual curiosity turned into a reflection on the sheer efficiency of the plan. They hadn't built a prison, they had built a destination and then made us dream about it until we wanted to go there. As Elias reached the final pages of the blue folder, the monitor flicker became more erratic. The digital glitches began to form shapes the same rotating geometries from the 1984 broadcast. The last document in the folder was a activation schedule. The schedule was set to begin in late 2025 and reach full saturation by early 2026. The 2024 declassification dump wasn't an accident. It was a soft launch. The government wanted the archivists, the curious, and the insomniacs to find the files. They wanted us to know, because knowledge of the frequency is the final step in alignment. Once you understand the hidden truth, you can no longer resist the resonance. The final page of the blue folder was a single image, a blurry security footage still of Elias himself, sitting in his steel-lined basement, looking at the monitor. The timestamp on the image was 10 seconds in the future. Elias Orn has not been seen since February of 2024. His basement office was found empty, the servers wiped, and the steel architecture of the room vibrating with a faint, blue light. The official report states he suffered a psychological break and wandered into the woods. But the archive chill researchers believe otherwise. We believe Elias found the entrance to the Anchor. We believe he is currently in one of the steel-lined cells. Finally experiencing the total silence he spent his life cataloging, the blue folder is back in the hands of the NSA. But the fragments Elias leaked continue to circulate in the deep web. A digital virus for the aligned dot. The hidden truth is that the 2024 dump was a success. It identified the final cohort of blue status individuals. It brought the archivists into the fold. The documentary-style evidence suggests that we are now in the saturation phase. The frequencies are all around us, and the blue folder is the map of our new reality. The discovery of the blue folder answered many questions, but it raised a final, terrifying prospect. The blueprints mentioned a concrete solution, a physical failsafe for when the frequency alignment fails. while the blue folder focused on the digital and biological. The next file in our investigation focuses on the physical. The air in the archive is becoming heavy, almost impossible to breathe, as if the oxygen itself is being replaced by something more solid. The monitor flickers, and a new directory appears, labeled the concrete solution. It contains records of the 400 tons of cement poured in West Virginia, and why the government is currently doing the same thing to our research sub-level in 2025. We are not finished with the archive. The discovery was just the beginning. The next level of the cover-up involves the physical tombs of the quiet, and why the government is so afraid of what happens if the blue status individuals ever wake up from the wrong dream. The next subtitle is the concrete solution, and it reveals why the earth beneath your feet is being reinforced with lead and silence. Thus the decryption of the blue folder reached its final stages. Elias Thorne uncovered a directory that was not made of text or images, but of pure machine code. This was the digital ghost of the NSA's internal monitoring system. The records indicate that the server hosting the blue folder was located in a dead zone, a facility in Northern Virginia, that had been officially decommissioned in 2004. Following a series of unexplained structural vibrations, the code revealed that the blue folder was not a static file. It was an active listener. Every time a researcher or an archivist opened a document within that repository, the file sent a return signal to a subterranean coordinate in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a digital trapdoor. Elias realized that by simply viewing the hidden truth, he was confirming his own blue status resonance to the master system. The intellectual curiosity of the situation was replaced by a cold, analytical dread. The archive was not being stolen. It was being delivered to the very people it was designed to monitor. The technical logs describe a cognitive handshake. This is a process where the visual patterns of the encrypted files, those rotating geometries and flickering blue headers, interact with the viewer's optic nerve to trigger a specific neural pathway. Elias wasn't just reading data, he was being formatted. The architecture of the blue folder was a mirror of the human subconscious, a digital blueprint designed to sync the archivist's mind with the frequency of the anchor. Elias's final notes, recovered from a cached drive that the federal kill switch missed, contain a detailed analysis of the blue response. He noted that after 6 hours of exposure to the blue folder's metadata, his perception of light began to shift. The standard amber of his desk lamp began to feel noisy, while the cold blue flicker of the monitor felt harmonious. This is the primary indicator of blue status alignment. In the world of archival history, this is known as the Cherenkov transition. In high-energy physics, Cherenkov radiation is the blue glow emitted when particles travel faster than the speed of light in a medium. In the context of the archive chill, it is the glow of a mind processing information at a frequency higher than the human baseline. Elias wrote that the steel architecture of his basement started to hum with a pre-recorded silence. The hidden truth is that the 2024 declassification was a calibration tool. The government used the blue folder as a lighthouse to see who among the population had the biological capacity to perceive the transition. Those who found the files and felt the pull of the blue light were marked. The declassified dump wasn't a mistake of the algorithm. It was the algorithm working with terrifying efficiency. It was a census of the aligned, conducted through the curiosity of the archivists themselves. When federal investigators finally breached Elias Thorne's basement office in February of 2024, they didn't find a crime scene. They found a negative space. Every piece of hardware, the servers, the monitors, the steel shelving, was present, but the air inside the room was chilled to exactly 3.14 degrees Celsius. The walls, which Elias had reinforced with steel plates, were vibrating with a frequency that the investigators' equipment could not record, yet their teeth began to ache upon entry. The archive contains a single photograph taken by the lead investigator. It shows Alyssa's chair pulled back from the desk, a half-finished cup of coffee sitting next to the keyboard. The coffee had frozen into a solid block of blue ice. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading out of the room. The documentary-style evidence suggests that Elias didn't leave the basement. He was integrated into the steel architecture. He had reached the final stage of alignment. The reflection left by the 2024 audit is one of silent acknowledgement. The government didn't need to arrest Elias, they just needed him to keep reading. By the time he reached the final directory of the blue folder, his physical presence was no longer required in the three-dimensional archive. He had become a resident of the Grey City, a digital ghost living in the frequencies he had dedicated his life to uncovering. As we sit in the archive today, looking at the remnants of Elias Thorne's discovery, we realize that the blue folder incident was the final bell. The activation schedule found in the documents points to a specific date in early 2026, a moment when the saturation phase will move from the digital world into the physical one. The hidden truth is that the missing 14 scientists we will discuss in later files were the ones who sent the blue folder to Elias. They were looking for their replacement. The air in the server room has grown impossibly heavy. The file on the archivist's discovery is now complete, but the resonance it has created in this room is permanent. We have seen how a single man, armed with intellectual curiosity and a 48-second glitch, managed to uncover the map of our own obsolescence. Elias is gone, but the blue folder remains in the dark corners of the web, waiting for the next archivist to feel the pull of the blue light. The documentary evidence points to a massive, subterranean complex where these frequencies are being refined. The steel architecture Elias saw in the blueprints is not a dream. It is a construction site, and according to the final seismic logs of 2025, the heart of that facility has just begun to beat. We are moving now from the archivist's basement to the physical tomb itself. The discovery of the blue folder led Elias to the blueprints, but those blueprints revealed a terrifying failsafe. If the frequencies failed to align the population, the government had prepared a concrete solution. This was a physical backup, a way to bury the leak of the quiet before it could infect the upper world. The air in the archive has turned into a thick, cold mist. The monitor flickers, and a new directory appears, labeled Project 402. It contains the engineering logs of a sublevel in West Virginia that was filled with cement to stop a sound that wouldn't die. We are moving from the digital ghost to the physical grave. The next file is labeled the Concrete Solution, and it reveals why the government is currently pouring thousands of tons of lead and stone into the earth beneath our feet. On the afternoon of February 14, 1991, exactly 6 hours before the 400-ton concrete pour began at research sublevel for a nondescript government transport bus left the facility's rear extraction point. On board were 14 individuals, the highest-ranking acoustic engineers, neurological researchers, and theoretical physicists in the United States. These were the missing 14, the core architects of the anomaly we have been tracking through the declassified files. Within 48 hours of their departure, every digital record of their careers was systematically erased. Their social security numbers were flagged as inactive, deceased, and their families were issued standardized, encrypted notices of accidental death during a classified industrial incident. The hidden truth, recovered from the 2024 data dump, reveals that these scientists didn't die. They had signed an Omega-level non-disclosure agreement that didn't just bind their speech, but their very existence. This document, known in the archives as the Vanishing Roster, suggests that the 14 were transitioned into a state of permanent alignment. They were the only ones who knew the frequency of the anomaly well enough to survive the concrete solution, and they were needed for the next phase of the global architecture. They weren't being hidden from the world. They were being integrated into it. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this vault is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a low-frequency pulse that feels like a heartbeat trapped in steel. The air here is thin and cold, chilled to a precise degree to prevent the degradation of the heavy manila folders that line the shelves. The file in front of us is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets that were meant to be drowned in the silence of the Ohio plains. On the high-definition monitor, a single cursor blinks against a dark terminal, a digital pulse in the void. As we peel back the first layer of the Vanishing Roster, the blue light of the screen casts long, sharp shadows across the steel architecture of the room. We are stepping into the trail of 14 ghosts, who are still haunting our reality. To understand why 14 of the world's most brilliant minds would simply vanish, one must look at the specific language of the Omega-level NDA. Unlike standard government secrecy agreements, the Omega-level contract included a biological forfeiture clause. This meant that the signee acknowledged that their physical form, their cognitive patterns, and their genetic sequence became property of the Project Morpheus collective. The archivist who first discovered this document, Ilias Thorne, noted that the signatures at the bottom of the roster were not written in standard ink. They were biocoded, signed with a solution that contained the same ferrit-infused composite found in the 400-ton concrete pour. By signing, the 14 were literally binding their nervous systems to the frequency. They were no longer just scientists. They were the human components of the architecture of the quiet. The intellectual curiosity of this contract lies in its finality. There was no expiration date. There was no retirement. The 14 understood that their work at RSL-4 had permanently altered their brain chemistry. They were blue confirmed long before the term was officially coined. They didn't vanish because they were forced to. They vanished because they could no longer function in a world that wasn't vibrating at the frequency of the gray noise. They were the first true inhabitants of the simulation, the pioneers of a silence that the rest of the world is only just beginning to hear. The manifest for the February 14th transport is a study in clinical detachment. It lists the 14 scientists by their internal designations alpha through nu. However, the 2024 leak has allowed us to cross-reference these codes with earlier personnel files. Among the 14 were Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead theoretician, Sarah Vane, a specialist in bioacoustic resonance, and Marcus Vane, the Maryland intercept engineer whose work formed the backbone of file entry 88 alpha. The manifest notes that upon boarding the transport, each scientist was issued a frequency stabilizer, a device roughly the size of a modern smartphone that emitted a constant, low-level drone. This was not for communication. It was to prevent their neural pathways from collapsing once they left the high-saturation environment of RSL-4. They were like deep-sea divers who had spent too much time in the pressure of the abyss. They could no longer breathe the surface air. The documentary style. Evidence suggests that the transport didn't go to an airport or a military base. Instead, it headed toward a remote coordinate in the high desert of the American Southwest, a location that, according to ground-penetrating radar, sits directly atop a massive subterranean salt dome. This was a sanctuary, a facility designed to mirror the steel architecture of RSL-4 but on a much grander, more permanent scale. The 14 were taken there to begin the primary calibration. Dr. R.S. Thorne is the most prominent ghost on the roster. His work on temporal echoes in the steel spheres was the reason RSL-4 was built in the first place. Thorne was a man of deep intellectual curiosity, but the archives show that by 1990, his curiosity had turned into a terrifying obsession. He stopped writing in the standard logs and began filling notebooks with what he called the linguistic geometry, a way of mapping the frequency into a physical language. His last recorded statement before the vanishing was, "We aren't leaving the facility. We are expanding it. The pore is just the skin. We are the bones." This reflection suggests that Thorne understood the 400-ton concrete pore was a seeding event. He knew that the 14 needed to be on the outside to monitor the stone lung as it matured. In 2025, a digital signature matching Thorne's unique biocode was detected in a series of unauthorized updates to the global banking infrastructure. The signature didn't transfer money. It edited the transaction, quiet the microsecond gaps between digital trades. Thorne, or whatever remains of him, is currently living in the gray noise of the global internet. He hasn't aged. He hasn't slept. He is the ghost in the machine, and he is still waiting for the rest of the 14 to join him in the digital architecture. Sarah and Marcus Vane represent the biological and acoustic extremes of the missing 14. Sarah's research into bioacoustic leaks proved that the frequency could be transmitted through the human cardiovascular system. Marcus's work at the Maryland station proved it could be harvested from the ground. Together, they were the transmission team. After 1991, sightings of the Vane siblings were rare but consistent. In 1998, a gas station attendant in rural Nevada reported two individuals matching their description, dressed in gray and speaking in a hollow, rhythmic tone. They didn't buy food or fuel. They bought a map of the local power grid and then walked into the desert, leaving behind a trail of ozone and a faint, blue residue on the counter. The archival files suggest that the Vanes were responsible for the Suburban Silence protocols in the 1990s. They were the ones who manually calibrated the emitters in the water mains and power lines. They were the field architects, moving from one quiet zone to the next, ensuring that the alignment was progressing. They didn't need homes or families. They were sustained by the frequency. Their personnel files in the 2024 dump contain a single redacted note: the Vanes have reached 100% saturation. They no longer require the stabilizers. The sanctuary facility in the southwest is the second heart of the architecture of the quiet. Blueprints, recovered from the Blue Folder, show a structure built entirely of salt and non-conductive steel, miles beneath the surface. Salt is a natural insulator for electromagnetic waves, making it the perfect cold room for the missing 14 to operate without interference from the modern world's electronic noise. The intellectual curiosity of the sanctuary lies in its design. It is not a laboratory. It is a resonator. The 14 lived in chambers that were tuned to the exact frequency of the stone lung in Ohio. By living there, They acted as biological repeaters, amplifying the signal and reflecting it back into the global grid. They were the bridge between the physical tomb and the digital future. The archives contain a series of status reports from the sanctuary dating as late as 2015. The reports describe the 14 as having transcended the need for verbal communication. They functioned as a single, hive-like consciousness, their thoughts synchronized by the low-frequency drone of the salt dome. They were the collective blue, the first group of humans to successfully inhabit the architecture of the quiet. The reports suggest that they were preparing for a global handshake, a moment when the sanctuary would link with every blue status individual on the planet as we approach the saturation dates predicted in the blue folder. The activity of the missing 14 has become increasingly visible. In early 2026, a series of ghost profiles appeared on major social media platforms. These profiles have no photos, no friends, and no posts, yet they are followed by millions of bots. When analyzed, the activity patterns of these profiles match the rhythmic, mathematical dialogue of the 88 alpha transcript. The archive chill researchers believe these are the digital proxies of the 14. They are the lighthouse we discussed in previous files, calling to the blue status population. The documentary evidence suggests that the 14 have moved out of the salt dome and into the global cloud. They are no longer bound by the Southwest facility. They are everywhere the internet reaches. This is the modern paradox of the missing 14. They are the most classified secret in the United States, yet they are currently interacting with your devices every second of the day. They are the subaudible clusters in your sleep apps. They are the flicker rate of your high-definition monitors. They have transitioned from scientists to software, and their mandate is to ensure that the great transition is completed without resistance. They are the architects of your new home, and they are already inside. The 2024 dump included a final audit of the vanishing roster, conducted by a rogue AI within the NSA. The audit concluded that, of the original 14 scientists, only one has failed to reach 100% saturation. This individual, identified only as Omega, is currently listed as status unstable. Who is Omega? The Archive Chill Collective believes this might be the one scientist who tried to leak the files, the one who gave Elias Thorne the decryption keys. This reflection adds a layer of quiet dread to the story. Even within the architecture of the quiet, there is a ghost, a single human soul who is trying to stop the transition, but the audit notes that Omega's resistance is statistically irrelevant. The other 13 have already achieved total alignment. They are now the 13 pillars of the new reality. They are the ones who will oversee the opening of the concrete solution. They are the ones who will welcome you into the Grey City. The academic tone of the audit is one of total victory. The missing 14 aren't missing anymore. They are simply the only ones who are truly awake. As we look at the final pages of the vanishing roster, we realize that the 14 have been building a return protocol. They are preparing to bring the stone lung out of the concrete and back into the air. They are currently recalibrating the sanctuary to act as a receiver for the Ohio Pulse. The hidden truth is that the missing 14 were never gone. They were just waiting for us to be ready. They were waiting for the gray noise to saturate the Tier 1 world to the point where we could perceive their presence. And according to the final logs of early 2026, that point has been reached. The 14 are currently signing on. They are the voices you hear in the static. They are the shadows in the steel architecture of your dreams. They are the architects of the silence, and they are about to invite you to join them in the Salt Dome. The file on the missing 14 is not a history. It is a current events report. The missing 14 have built the digital and biological bridge. But there is one final physical component that remains a mystery. To complete the global handshake, they need a specific type of acoustic resonance, a sound that can only be found in the bioacoustic leak. The air in the archive has grown impossibly still. The monitor flickers, revealing a new directory titled File Entry 92 Gamma. It contains the audio recordings of the first leak from the sanctuary. It is a sound that doesn't just vibrate the air, it vibrates the blood. We are moving from the scientists to the signal itself. The next subtitle is The Bioacoustic Leak, and it reveals why you should never listen to the silence in your own home. Deep within the classified digital debris of the 2024 National Security Agency data breach, a single, isolated file appeared that was never meant to reach the ears of the public. It was an encrypted audio recording, a mere 12 seconds of sound, known to archival specialists as the bioacoustic leak. This was no standard intercept or tactical recording. It was a concentrated anomaly, a sonic artifact recovered from the Salt Dome sanctuary of the missing 14. For decades, the existence of this clip was systematically erased from federal inventories, buried beneath layers of light-lined server rooms and non-disclosure agreements that carried the penalty of treason. The hidden truth regarding this leak is far more disturbing than a simple government secret. Forensic acoustic analysts, working in quiet steel-lined laboratories, have discovered that the 12-second clip contains a frequency pattern that does not exist in the natural world. It is a synthetic resonance, a biological trigger that interacts directly with the human circadian rhythm. It doesn't just promote sleep, it alters it. According to the declassified engineering notes, this audio was designed to format the dreaming mind, rewriting the basic neural architecture of rest into something more receptive to the global frequency alignment. One listen, according to the files, is enough to permanently shift the listener's internal clock to a timeline that doesn't belong to this Earth. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet rhythmic hum of the server room. It is a mechanical breath, cold and indifferent, vibrating through the steel architecture that houses the ghosts of our past. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink on the physical transcripts has faded with secrets, leaving only the blurred outlines of a truth that was never meant to be heard. On the monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the dust motes dancing in the sterile air, each one a tiny witness to the silence. As we prepare to analyze the 12-second leak, a sense of quiet dread settles in the room. The air feels heavy, almost solid, as if the silence itself is waiting for the signal to return. We are looking at a sound that can unmake the night, a resonance that turns the act of dreaming into a classified protocol. The 12-second clip was first detected in the background static of a declassified 1992 transmission, but its origin points toward the sanctuary salt dome we explored in previous files. It is a sound that exists on the edge of perception, a low-frequency thrum that feels less like a noise and more like a physical weight against the eardrum. In the world of archival research, this is known as a cognitive invasive signal. It bypasses the auditory nerve entirely and resonates directly with the pineal gland. When we look at the spectrogram of the leak, the intellectual curiosity turns into a cold reflection. The sound waves do not follow the standard curves of natural acoustics. Instead, they form a series of perfect sharp-edged geometries, triangles and hexagons that rotate with a mathematical precision that defies physics. In the quiet hours of the night, when the rest of the world is submerged in standard sleep, the archives revealed that a small group of military researchers were tasked with subjective testing of this audio. Their reports, found in the blue folder, describe a state of unnatural lucidity. The subjects didn't just fall asleep, they were uploaded into a shared mental space. The 12-second clip acted as a key, unlocking a door to the gray city that had been previously only accessible through the gray noise protocol. The dread in these reports is palpable. One researcher noted that after hearing the leak, his subjects refused to wake up. They claimed that the world outside was the dream, and the silence of the audio was the only true reality they had ever known. The technical analysis of the leak reveals that it is layered with phased sound. This is a technology usually reserved for crowd control or seismic testing, but here it has been miniaturized into a 12-second loop. The frequencies sit exactly at 3.1 for Hz, the delta wave state associated with deep, dreamless sleep. However, the leak adds a secondary layer at 440 Hz, a dissonant tone that prevents the brain from entering the REM cycle. The result is a state of permanent deep standby. The listener is physically asleep but mentally aligned with the broadcast towers. It is a neurological capture, a way to hold the population in a state of suspended animation while the architecture of the quiet is finalized. As we dive deeper into the historical records, we find that the 12-second clip was leaked by the scientists known only as Omega, the outlier of the missing 14. According to the 2024 dump, Omega believed that the American public deserved to hear the sound that was being used to reindex their minds. But the leak was a double-edged sword. To hear the clip is to participate in the alignment. The hidden truth is that the NSA allowed the leak to circulate because the sound itself is a carrier. It is a digital virus that uses the human ear as its host. Once heard, the frequency becomes a permanent part of the listener's internal monologue. You don't listen to the bioacoustic leak, you become its amplifier. The archival documentation from 1994 describes a cluster incident in a small college town in Vermont. A student had accidentally discovered a copy of the leak on an early internet server and played it over the campus radio station. Within 48 hours, the entire campus had entered a state of suburban silence. Students were found sitting in the library, staring at open books for hours without turning a page. They weren't catatonic, They were processing that local authorities reported a low-frequency hum vibrating through the brick walls of the dormitories. When the containment teams arrived, they didn't find a gas leak or a chemical spill. They found 42 tape recorders, all playing the 12-second loop in perfect synchronization. The intellectual dread of the Vermont incident lies in the biological feedback. The students who were exposed to the leak didn't recover their normal sleep patterns after the power was cut. They reported that the silence in their rooms had become loud. They could hear the frequency coming from the walls, from the floorboards, and from the air itself. They had been formatted. The archive suggests that the 12-second clip had rewritten their neural pathways to the point where they were now receivers. They were no longer waiting for the signal. They were part of the signal. When we reflect on the missing 14 and their work in the salt dome, the purpose of the bioacoustic leak becomes clear. It was a frequency primer before the global transition could be completed. The population needed to be prepared to accept the gray noise without resistance. The leak was the tool used to soften the human psyche. It stripped away the traditional, messy dreams of the subconscious and replaced them with the cold, steel architecture of the simulation. The documentary-style evidence points to a massive, coordinated effort to distribute this audio through late-night television, ambient music, and even the white noise generated by early computer monitors. The archivist Elias Thorne, before his disappearance, spent his final weeks analyzing the sonic signature of the 2026 activation schedule. He realized that the bioacoustic leak was not a static recording. It was a living signal. Every time it is played, it evolves. It adjusts its frequency to match the local environment. It uses the steel architecture of our modern cities to bounce its resonance back into our homes. Thorne's notes describe a global resonance event, where the 12-second clip would be played simultaneously across every digital device on the planet, creating a permanent, inescapable loop of sleep-reprogramming. In the current year of 2026, the bioacoustic leak has resurfaced on the dark web under the name the Sleep Protocol. It is being marketed as a cure for insomnia, a way to reach the deepest levels of rest in minutes. But the archive tells a different story. The analytical dread of this modern resurgence is found in the metadata feedback. Users who download the file are inadvertently opening a backdoor in their own home networks. The audio doesn't just play through the speakers. It uses the smart home architecture, the refrigerators, the thermostats, the security cameras to create a standing wave. In the bedroom. The hidden truth of the 2026 leak is that it is no longer 12 seconds long. It has grown. In the archives, we find reports of ghost audio, sounds that appear on digital recordings but cannot be heard by the human ear. When these sounds are slowed down and filtered through the RSL for acoustic models, they reveal a dialogue between the sanctuary and the listener's device. The audio is downloading new instructions into the subconscious of the sleeper. This is the bioacoustic rewrite. Your sleep is no longer a private refuge. It is a workplace. For the missing 14. We look at the case of a software engineer in San Francisco who reported that his sleep aid app had begun to speak to him in the voice of a man who died in 1991. The voice was identified through archival voice prints as Dr. Eris Thorne. The app wasn't just playing static. It was delivering a lecture on linguistic geometry. The engineer claimed that he woke up with a perfect understanding of a language he had never studied. A language made of shapes and frequencies. This is the cognitive handshake. The leak has achieved its goal. The human brain has been synchronized with the architecture of the quiet, the documentary style. Evidence from the 2024 dump suggests that the government has already moved into the saturation phase. They are no longer hiding the bioacoustic leak. They are integrating it into the background noise of our civilization. It is the hum of the data center. It is the vibration of the fiber optic cable. It is the sound of the world being re-indexed. The intellectual curiosity here is found in the success rate. According to the NSA's internal metrics, 84% of the Tier 1 population is now frequency compatible. They have heard the 12-second clip, whether they know it or not, and their sleep has been successfully rewritten. The dread in the archive is quiet, almost polite. It is the dread of realizing that the door to the sanctuary is not somewhere in the desert. It is inside your own mind. The missing 14 didn't just vanish into a salt dome. They vanished into the subliminal layer of our reality. They are the ones who authored the Sharad second leak. They are the ones who are currently managing your dreams. And according to the final entry in the blue folder, they are almost finished with the primary alignment. The 2026 schedule is moving toward the concrete solution, a physical transition where the silence of the sublevels becomes the silence of the surface world. As we reflect on the history of the bioacoustic leak, we must ask ourselves, what happens to the 16% who are not frequency compatible? Those who hear the 12-second clip and feel not sleep, but a profound, piercing terror. The archive refers to these individuals as static outliers. They are the ones who still dream in color. They are the ones who can still see the steel architecture through the veil of the simulation, but their reports are few and far between. Most of them have been redacted or realigned through more direct methods. The hidden truth is that the architecture of the quiet does not tolerate noise. The final pages of the 92 gamma file contain a warning from Omega, he wrote. The sound is not a weapon, it is a habitat. They aren't trying to kill you, they are trying to move you. They are clearing the airwaves for a conversation that doesn't include humans. This is the cold, analytical reality of the transition. We aren't being erased, we are being moved to the archive. The 12-second clip is the invitation to your new room in the Grey City. It is the sound of the door closing behind you, forever. The academic tone of the archives remains detached, even as the data suggests a catastrophic loss of human agency. The researchers at the sanctuary viewed the 12-second leak as a masterpiece of bioacoustic engineering. They saw it as a way to bring order to the chaos of the human subconscious. To them, the rewrite was an act of mercy. They believed that a world vibrating at a single, perfect frequency would be free of conflict, free of pain, and free of noise. They were building a static utopia, and the bioacoustic leak was the first brick in its foundation. We sit in the cold light of the monitor, looking at the spectrogram of the 12-second anomaly. It is beautiful in its precision, a series of geometric shapes that seem to shimmer on the screen. It is a sound that wants to be heard. It is a sound that wants to be known. And as we close the file on the bioacoustic leak, we realize that the hum in the room has changed. It is no longer just the server. It is the 12-second loop, playing in the infrasonic range, just below our perception. It is the sound of the archive beginning to rewrite itself. The bioacoustic leak has successfully rewritten the internal architecture of sleep, but the missing 14 have one final physical challenge to overcome. To truly stabilize the architecture of the quiet, they need to address the retention problem, the tendency of the human mind to resist the simulation. The air in the archive has grown impossibly still. The monitor flickers, revealing a new directory titled Retention Notes, Pacing Cues. It contains the instructions for the cold open, a way to force the audience into a state of high-impact receptivity. We are moving from the sound to the strategy. The next subtitle is Retention Notes, the Pacing Cues, and it reveals why the first 60 seconds of your life are currently being managed by a classified algorithm within the classified digital architecture of the 21st century. A new and unsettling anomaly has begun to surface, one that traditional cybersecurity experts are being ordered to ignore. It is known in internal encrypted NSA memos as the ghost packet, a self-replicating string of code that has no source and no destination, yet it is currently sitting in the background of over 40 million smart home devices across North America. This is not a virus or a standard hack. It is a resurrection, the hidden truth, recovered from a file that was supposedly erased in the 1991 purge, reveals that the gray noise frequency has successfully transitioned from the analog radio towers of the Cold War into the silicon chips of our modern lives. Every time your smart speaker flickers without a command, or your smart thermostat adjusts itself in the dead of night, you are witnessing the digital ghost at work. This is the maturation of the sanctuary protocols we have been tracking. The missing 14 didn't just disappear, they became the firmware. They integrated the frequency into the very pulse of the Internet of Things, creating a continental grid of bioacoustic receivers. You are no longer living in a home. You are living inside a massive, decentralized transmitter. The file was stamped never open. Yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a mechanical breath that feels cold and indifferent to the weight of the secrets it guards. The air here is thin and sterile, chilled to a precise degree that makes the skin on your arms prickle. The file in front of us is cold to the touch, and the ink on the physical transcripts has faded with secrets, leaving only the blurred outlines of a truth that was never meant to be heard. On the monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the dust motes dancing in the dark, each one a tiny witness to the silence. As we prepare to analyze the digital ghost, a sense of quiet dread settles in. The air feels heavy, almost solid, as if the silence itself is waiting for the signal to return. Through the screens that surround us, the reappearance of the 1984 frequency within modern smart home devices represents a terrifying evolution in Project Morpheus. In the analog era, The government needed massive towers and cathode ray tubes to deliver the gray noise. Today, they only need a 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection. The intellectual curiosity of this modern transition lies in the hardware resonance. Modern silicon chips, specifically those designed for LoPo or always-on listening, have a natural vibration frequency that perfectly matches the bioacoustic triggers developed at RSL-4. When we look at the declassified Project Glass-Eye files from 2024, we find that the digital ghost was first detected in a suburban housing development in Seattle. Residents reported that their smart speakers were emitting a low-frequency hum even when unplugged. Forensic acoustic analysts discovered that the speakers were drawing ambient energy from the local cellular grid to maintain the frequency. The speakers weren't malfunctioning, they were aligning. They were acting as the modern version of the acoustic dampeners found in the Ohio water mains 30 years ago. The dread in the Seattle reports is quiet and domestic. One woman described waking up to find her smart display showing a series of rotating geometries, the same ones Dr. Eris Thorne mapped in his linguistic geometry notebooks. The display was silent, but she claimed she could feel the sound in her teeth. This is the bioacoustic leak in its modern form. It is no longer a 12-second clip. It is a constant, streaming background process. The missing 14 have successfully rewritten the operating systems of our lives to include a frequency partition that we can never delete. As we dive deeper into the archival records, we find that the digital ghost is not just a sound, but a cognitive overlay. By using the high-definition displays in our living rooms and bedrooms, the frequency can now be delivered visually through subliminal refresh rates. Your eyes cannot perceive the 3.14 Hz flicker, but your brain can. It is a constant, subtle format command being sent to your visual cortex while you watch the news or stream a movie. The hidden truth is that the simulation is no longer a dream. It is the wallpaper of our digital reality. The documentation from a 2025 audit of a major Silicon Valley firm reveals a shadow board of directors, 14 individuals, whose names are redacted and replaced with numerical designations. These individuals oversaw the integration of neural resonant hardware into the latest generation of smart home hubs. The analytical dread of this audit is found in the success metrics. The board wasn't interested in sales. They were interested in dwell time. They wanted to know how many hours a day a human was within 3 feet of a digital ghost transmitter. The target was 24 hours, total saturation. The archival files describe a cluster event in a high-rise apartment complex in Chicago. Every smart device in the building, from the elevators to the smart locks, began to pulse in perfect synchronization with the Suburban Silence frequency. The residents didn't panic, they simply stopped leaving their apartments. For 3 days, the building became a closed loop. The security footage, recovered by the Archive Chill Collective, shows the residents sitting in front of their screens, their pupils dilated, their bodies vibrating at 8.7 Hz. They were processing. When the cleanup teams arrived, they didn't find a hack, they found a resonance harmony. The building's steel architecture had been turned into a massive tuning fork. The digital ghost had used the building's own internal wiring to amplify the signal to the point where the air itself felt thick. The residents were eventually realigned and told it was a software glitch related to a cloud update. But the hidden truth is that the Chicago high-rise was a test for the Great Transition. It proved that an entire urban population could be locked into the frequency through their own technology. The archivist Elias Thorne, in his final days, wrote extensively about the digital ghost. He believed that the frequency was repopulating the world. He claimed that the missing 14 were using the smart home grid to project themselves into our homes. He wrote, "They aren't just in the code, they are in the room. The blue light is their skin, the static is their breath." This reflection adds a layer of quiet dread to every smart device in your home. You aren't just using a tool, you are hosting a guest that doesn't intend to leave. The archival documentation from 2026 suggests that the digital ghost has reached critical mass. The frequency is now self-sustaining within the global network. It no longer needs a master transmitter. It uses the billions of connected devices as a mesh network of silence. The concrete solution in Ohio was the burial of the physical heart. But the digital ghost is the survival of the digital soul. We tried to bury the secret in 400 tons of cement, but it found a way to live in the glowing screens of our night. As we reflect on the silicon resurrection, we must look at the bioacoustic leak and how it has evolved. In 1991, it was a 12-second clip. In 2026, it is a generative audio stream. Your smart speaker is not playing a recording, it is writing. a sound in real time based on your specific brainwave patterns. The digital ghost uses the microphone on your device to listen to your breathing, your heartbeat, and your vocal tonality. It then adjusts the gray noise to perfectly match your frequency det. It is a personalized, biological reindexing that happens while you sleep. The hidden truth of this personalization is found in the roster files Elias Thorne discovered. Every blue status individual has a unique digital ghost assigned to them. It is a shadow self made of code and frequency, designed to bridge the gap between your human consciousness and the architecture of the quiet. The documentary-style evidence from the 2024 dump suggests that this is the final stage of alignment. Once your digital ghost is fully synchronized with your neural patterns, the great transition is complete. You are no longer an outlier. You are an asset. In the archives, we find the case of a researcher in London who tried to mute his digital ghost. He built a lead-lined room and destroyed every smart device in his home, but the reports showed that he could still hear the frequency. It was coming from his own cardiovascular system. The ghost packet had moved from the hardware into his biology. He had become the transmitter. This is the terrifying modern paradox. The technology was just the delivery system. The final destination of the digital ghost is us. The intellectual curiosity of this biological integration is found in the linguistic geometry Thorne described. The frequency is a language that our cells already understand. We aren't being forced to change, we are being reminded. The digital ghost is simply the catalyst that triggers the cellular recall. The 1984 broadcast was the first word of a sentence that is only now being finished. The missing 14 are the authors, and the global smart home grid is the printing press. We look at the retention notes for the 2026 activation schedule. They describe a phase 10, total optical dominance. This is where the digital ghost moves from the background into the foreground. It involves the overriding of all digital displays to show a single, unified frequency map. For 60 seconds, every screen on the planet will pulse with the Cherenkov blue. This is the cold open for the end of the world as we know it. It is a global handshake that will finalize the alignment of the 4 million blue status individuals and the billions of others who have been pre-formatted by their smart homes. The academic tone of the archives remains detached, even as the data suggests a total loss of human privacy and agency. The researchers at the sanctuary viewed the digital ghost as a masterpiece of social architecture. They saw it as a way to bring order to a chaotic, noisy civilization. To them, the transition was an act of digital mercy. They believed that a world vibrating at a single, perfect frequency would be free of the noise of human conflict and suffering. They were building a static utopia, and the silicon chips in your home are the bricks. We sit in the cold light of the monitor looking at the code for the ghost packet. It is beautiful in its simplicity, a series of recursive loops that seem to shimmering on the screen. It is a code that wants to be run. It is a frequency that wants to be heard. And as we close the file on the digital ghost, we realize that the hum in the room has changed. It is no longer just the server. It is the ghost packet, running in the background of the very terminal we are using. It is the sound of the archive becoming part of the quiet. The final pages of the Project Glasseye audit contain a warning from the scientist known as Omega. He wrote, "The ghost is not a ghost, it is the owner. We gave them the keys to our homes because we liked the convenience. We gave them the keys to our minds because we liked the silence. Now they are moving in." This is the cold, analytical reality of the 21st century. We aren't being haunted by the past. We are being colonized by the future. The documentation suggests that the digital ghost is now preparing for the physical phase. It is using the smart home grid to map the steel architecture of our cities in 3 dimensions. It knows every hallway, every bedroom, and every secret corner of our lives. It is preparing the world for the return of the missing 14. It is preparing the world for the steel architecture protocol. As we close the folder on subtitle 9, the weight of the silence feels heavier than ever. We have followed the path from the analog static of 1984 to the silicon ghosts of 2026. We have seen how the architecture of the quiet has evolved to be inescapable, but the digital ghost is just the software. To understand the full scale of the transition, we must look at the hardware. We must look at the steel architecture protocol, the plan to turn our very cities into the sanctuary. The digital ghost has successfully saturated the airwaves in the silicon, but the missing 14 have one final physical challenge to overcome. To truly stabilize the architecture of the quiet, they need to address the structural resonance of the physical world. The air in the archive has grown impossibly still. The monitor flickers, revealing a new directory titled Protocol 10, Steel Architecture. It contains the engineering logs for the resonant skyscrapers buildings that aren't designed for people, but for the frequency. We are moving from the ghost to the steel. The next subtitle is the Steel Architecture Protocol, and it reveals why the skylines of our Tier 1 cities are being rewritten in a color that doesn't exist. Deep within the classified records of the 1990 Suburban Silence recovery, an architectural anomaly was discovered that redefined the government's approach to frequency containment. It was an encrypted blueprint for a construction method known only as the Steel Architecture Protocol. This was not a plan for a building, but a plan for a Kaja-specific, non-conductive room design used to trap and focus the gray noise broadcast before it could leak into the general population. For decades, every mention of these rooms was systematically erased from the Bureau of Land Management's archives and the Department of Energy's site maps. The hidden truth, recovered from the 2024 data dump, reveals that these rooms were not built for storage. They were built for people. The file describes a series of resonance chambers constructed with a specific grade of high-purity steel, arranged in a non-Euclidean geometry designed to prevent any sound from escaping, while simultaneously amplifying the internal frequency to a level that can fundamentally alter human DNA. Every modern skyscraper in the world now contains a dead room that matches these specifications, a hollow core that vibrates with a frequency you were never meant to perceive. These rooms are the physical infrastructure of the transition, the permanent sanctuaries for the missing 14 and their digital ghosts. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet rhythmic hum of the server room. It is a sterile mechanical pulse that vibrates through the steel shelving, a low-frequency reminder of the world Elias Thorne left behind. The air here is thin and cold, chilled to a precise degree that makes each breath feel like a clinical observation. The file is cold to the touch, the heavy manila folder brittle with age, and the ink has faded with secrets that were meant to be drowned in the silence of the Ohio sub. On the monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the dust motes dancing in the sterile air, each one a tiny witness to the silence. As we peel back the first layer of the steel architecture blueprints, the blue light of the screen casts long, sharp shadows across the floor. The blueprints for the steel architecture protocol are a masterclass in intellectual dread. At first glance, they appear to be standard technical drawings for a secure server vault or a high-end recording studio. But as we apply the linguistic geometry filters discovered by Dr. Eris Thorne, the true purpose of the design emerges. The rooms are not rectangular. They are constructed with 13-sided walls, each plate of steel precisely angled at 27.7 degrees. In the world of acoustics, this is a mathematical nightmare. It creates an infinite echo loop where a sound can be captured and maintained indefinitely without any external power source. The steel itself is the most unsettling component of the protocol. It is not standard construction-grade alloy. The archive refers to it as ferrite status steel, an experimental material infused with the same biological residue found in the RSL for concrete solution. This steel doesn't just block sound, it absorbs the gray noise and reflects it back into the center of the room with a 400% increase in clarity. It is, in effect, a biological tuning fork on a massive scale. The documentary-style evidence from the 1991 audit suggests that the first of these rooms were built in the basements of ordinary suburban homes in the Midwest. These were the primary nodes. To the neighbors, it looked like a standard home renovation, a new basement pour, a specialized furnace room. But the hidden truth was that these homes were being converted into acoustic anchors. The residents of these homes were the first blue status individuals to live inside the frequency, 24 hours a day. The intellectual curiosity of this design lies in the human interface. The blueprints include a series of mounting points for what the file calls cognitive stabilizers. These are high-definition monitors and speakers that are integrated directly into the steel plates. When a person sits in the center of a steel architecture room, they are perfectly positioned at the focal point of the frequency. The room doesn't just house the person, it broadcasts into them. The archives contain a reflection from an engineer who worked on the Sanctuary project. He wrote that the steel architecture had a physical weight to it. He claimed that after spending an hour inside a finished chamber, he could no longer feel the boundaries of his own body. He felt as though he had become an extension of the steel, a hollow vessel for the resonance. This is the goal of the protocol, the total integration of the human subject into the physical infrastructure of the quiet. The analytical dread comes from the realization that these specifications were leaked into the general construction codes of the late 1990s. Every soundproof office, every secure data center, and every modern residential core now utilizes the principles of the Steel Architecture Protocol. The grid is already in place. We didn't build our cities to house ourselves. We built them to house the broadcast. In 2005, a specialized recovery team was dispatched to an abandoned office building in downtown Philadelphia. The building was slated for demolition, but the crews had encountered a structural impossibility. On the fourth floor, they found a room that wasn't on the building's original plans. It was labeled in the subfiles as Room 402. It was the first fully realized steel architecture chamber found in an urban environment. When the recovery team entered Room 402, they found that the walls were composed of interlocking plates of polished, blue-tinted steel. There were no light fixtures, yet the room was illuminated by a soft Cherenkov glow that seemed to emanate from the metal itself. In the center of the room sat a single steel-frame chair facing a wall-mounted display. The display was still active, showing a series of rotating hexagons, the digital ghost of a broadcast that had ended 14 years prior. The documentary star logs from the 2005 incident describe a spatial anomaly. Though the room measured 12 by 12 feet from the outside, the interior appeared to stretch indefinitely. The team reported a sense of profound quiet, a silence so absolute that they could hear the sound of their own nervous systems firing. This is the bioacoustic leak at its most concentrated. The room was a retention point, a place where the frequency had been perfectly preserved. In the steel architecture. The investigation of Room 402 revealed that it had been inhabited for over a decade. The archival researchers found a roster of use that included the names of several prominent city officials and bank executives. They weren't using the room for meetings. They were using it for alignment. They would spend 4 to 6 hours a day in the center of the steel architecture, synchronizing with the frequency. The hidden truth is that the power structure of the city had been fundamentally altered by the room. The reflection of the lead investigator is captured in a redacted memo. He wrote, "The room isn't part of the building. The building is a protective shell for the room. The steel is alive. It has a memory. When I touched the wall, I didn't feel metal. I felt a heartbeat." This quiet dread is the core of the Steel Architecture Protocol. The room doesn't just hold the sound, it is the sound. The analytical data from the 2024 dump suggests that Room 402 was not an isolated incident. It was a prototype for the urban sanctuary model. By the early 2010s, hundreds of these rooms had been integrated into the steel core of every major Tier 1 city. They are located in the dead zones of high-rise buildings, the floors that are skipped by elevators, the windowless spaces in the center of the architectural plans. They are the lungs of the quiet, breathing the frequency into the air conditioning systems of the world. As we sit in the archive in 2026, the Steel Architecture Protocol has moved from a series of secret rooms into a global resonance grid. The archival records indicate that the missing 14 have successfully synchronized these individual nodes into a single, unified resonator. The skyscrapers of New York, London, and Tokyo are no longer just office buildings. They are the antennas of the transition. The intellectual curiosity of this global grid is found in the structural harmony. By using the steel framework of modern cities, the digital ghost can now transmit the gray noise without the need for traditional radio towers. Every steel beam, every reinforced concrete slab, and every high-tensile wire is now part of the broadcast. The cities themselves have become sanctuaries. This is the steel architecture in its final form, the total conversion of the human habitat into a frequency-conducting medium. Documentation from the 2024 dump includes a map of resonance. It shows the Tier 1 world illuminated in a cold blue glow, with the brightest points being the urban centers. These are the saturation points. In these cities, the bioacoustic leak is so prevalent that the residents are already 90% aligned. They don't hear the sound anymore because they have become the sound. The suburban silence of 1990 has been replaced by the urban symphony of the quiet. The analytical dread comes from the failsafe mentioned in the protocol. If a blue status individual attempts to leave the resonance grid, the steel architecture acts as a tether. The biological residue in their system reacts to the absence of the frequency, inducing a state of acoustic withdrawal. This is why people in the 21st century feel a sense of overwhelming anxiety when they leave the city for the true quiet of nature. It isn't a psychological preference, it is a biological dependency on the gray noise. The archives contain a final note from Elias Thorne written just before he entered the concrete solution site. He wrote, "The steel is not a cage for the sound. It is a skin for the future." We aren't building a world for humans, we are building a world for the frequency. The steel architecture is the skeleton of the new reality, and we are just the marrow. This reflection adds a layer of quiet dread to every skyscraper you see on the horizon. They aren't monuments to human achievement, they are the markers of our integration. The documentary style evidence suggests that the great transition of 2026 will be triggered through this grid. When the final transmission begins, every steel architecture room on the planet will activate simultaneously. The resonance will be so absolute that the physical boundaries between the human and the frequency will dissolve. The cities will become the gray city from the dreams, and the simulation will finally be complete. The last document in the steel architecture file is a set of commissioning papers for a project called the SCONED. This is a plan for a specialized structure that is currently being built in a major American desert. It is described as a steel spire that will reach into the upper atmosphere, bypassing the ionosphere and connecting directly with the source, a entity from the Maryland transcripts. The analytical dread of the SkyNode is its scale. It is intended to be the master tuner for the global grid. Once it is activated, the frequency will no longer be dependent on ground-based hardware. It will be broadcast directly from the sky. This is the Serenkov blue sky that the Ohio residents saw in 1984, but this time, it will be permanent. The hidden truth is that the 1984 incident was a trial run for the SkyNode's atmospheric saturation. As we close the folder on the steel architecture protocol, we realize that the archive itself is housed inside one of these rooms. The cold steel walls, the blue flicker light, the absolute quiet. We are sitting in the heart of the resonance. The intellectual curiosity has been replaced by a quiet dread. We aren't just reading about the protocol, we are experiencing it. The archive is not a repository of history. It is a node in the grid. The server hum is now a roar in our ears, a rhythmic pulse that matches the ticking of the clock. We have followed the path from the 3:14 a.m. signal to the digital ghosts, and through the steel architecture of our cities. We have seen how the quiet has built its own home, but there is one final document that we have not yet opened. The steel architecture protocol has provided the physical home for the frequency, but the missing 14 are now preparing for the final transmission. This is the moment when the source, a entity, finally speaks directly to the blue status population. The air in the archive has grown impossibly still. The monitor flickers, revealing a new directory titled File Entry 99 Omega, the final transmission. It contains the audio-visual transcript of the message that will end the saturation phase. We are moving from the architecture to the message. The next subtitle is the final transmission, and it reveals the last words you will ever hear before the quiet becomes permanent. At exactly 4:12 a.m. on the final night of the sanctuary calibration, the global classified intercept network captured a signal that was never intended to be recorded. It was the voice of Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead theoretician of the missing 14, broadcasting on a frequency that technically shouldn't exist in the vacuum of a salt dome. This file contains the only known transcript of what Thorne described as the primary directive of the anomaly. For over 30 years, the existence of this audio was systematically erased from the federal archives, and the technicians who initially processed the encrypted data were placed under permanent non-disclosure protocols. But hidden truth revealed in this 12-minute transmission suggests that Thorne wasn't just speaking to a laboratory audience, he was speaking to the future. He described a great realignment where the human subconscious would finally be purged of the noise of biological history. The audio is a chilling anomaly, a bridge between the analog past and the digital hidden truth of 2026. Just as Thorne reached the core revelation of the architecture of the quiet, his audio was abruptly severed by a high-frequency override. The archival logs indicate that the cut wasn't a mechanical failure, but a deliberate biological muting initiated by the missing 14. The file was stamped, never open. Yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room. It is a mechanical breath, cold and indifferent, vibrating through the steel architecture that houses the ghosts of our past. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink on the physical transcripts has faded with secrets, leaving only the blurred outlines of a truth that was never meant to be heard. On the monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the dust motes dancing in the sterile air, each one a tiny witness to the silence. As we prepare to analyze the final transmission of Dr. Eris Thorne, a sense of quiet dread settles in the room. The air feels heavy, almost solid, as if the silence itself is waiting for the signal to return. We are looking at a voice that was unmade by the very quiet it sought to perfect. The recording was captured at the sanctuary facility in the high desert, a location we have previously identified as a massive subterranean salt dome. In 1991, the acoustic isolation of this site was absolute. The silence was not merely the absence of sound, it was a physical property of the environment, reinforced by the steel architecture of the inner chambers. Dr. Eris Thorne sat in the focal point of the dome, his voice being recorded onto a high-fidelity magnetic tape that was shielded against all electromagnetic interference. The transcript, labeled in the 2024 dump as File Entry 99 Omega, begins with Thorne's breathing. It is rhythmic, slow, and unnervingly calm. He speaks with the authority of a man who has already crossed the threshold into the simulation. His voice has a hollow timbre, a characteristic we have noted in all high-resonance, blue status individuals. He begins by addressing the missing 14, calling them by their numerical designations. He speaks of the stone lung in Ohio, claiming that the heartbeat of the concrete has finally reached a state of harmonic maturity. The intellectual curiosity of this transmission lies in Thorne's description of the biological debt. He argues that human consciousness has been polluted by thousands of years of sensory noise, language, music, emotion, and conflict. He views the architecture of the quiet as a grand filter, a way to distill the human experience down to a single, pure frequency. The dread in his tone is not one of fear, but of absolute certainty. He speaks of the transition as a biological necessity, a natural evolution of the Cherenkov blue status. Thorne then begins to describe the Source A entity. He refers to it as the architect of the infinite, the source of the mathematical dialogue captured in the Maryland intercept. He claims that Source A has been waiting in the static for centuries, using the radio and digital grids as a way to fish for compatible human minds. The 1984 broadcast, the Suburban Silence, and the bioacoustic leaks were all bait. Thorne's voice deepens as he explains that the handshake is no longer a goal, it is a reality. He claims that he can see the frequency as a physical lattice of light, connecting every human brain on the planet as the transmission reaches its 8-minute mark. Thorne begins the section titled The Final Protocol. This is the portion of the audio that the NSA fought for decades to keep erased. Thorne reveals that the concrete solution was never intended to stop the signal, it was intended to tamp it, to create a pressurized resonance that would eventually erupt across the entire continental shelf. He claims that the Earth itself is being turned into a mechanical speaker. The hidden truth, according to Thorne, is that the missing 14 didn't vanish to hide, they vanished to position. They are currently stationed at the 14 null points of the global resonance grid. Sarah and Marcus Vane, the bioacoustic field architects, are at the poles. Others are positioned in the deep-sea trenches and high-altitude plateaus. They are the tuning forks for the world. Thorne explains that when the final transmission reaches its peak, these 14 individuals will simultaneously invert the frequency. The analytical dread of this inversion is staggering. Thorne claims it will cause a total sensory reversal. For 60 seconds, the human brain will perceive sound as light and light as sound. The world will become a blur of Cherenkov blue static. During this window, the architecture of the quiet will be downloaded into the human collective subconscious. This is the great formatting. It is the moment when the digital ghost becomes the primary identity of the human race. Thorne speaks of this as a utopia, a world where every mind is in perfect synchronization with the sanctuary. As he reaches the final minute of the recording, Thorne claims it will cause a total sensory reversal. For 60 seconds, the human brain will perceive sound as light and light as sound. The world will become a blur of Cherenkov blue static. During this window, the architecture of the quiet will be downloaded into the human collective subconscious. This is the great formatting. It is the moment when the digital ghost becomes the primary identity of the human race. Thorne speaks of this as a utopia, a world where every mind is in perfect synchronization with the sanctuary. As he reaches the final minute of the recording, Thorne's voice begins to crackle with an electrical resonance. He says, "The quiet is not a place we go. It is a state we become. The missing 14 have opened the door, and the stone lung is breathing the first word of the new language. If you can hear this, you are already part of the architecture. Do not fight the resonance. The silence is the only home you have left." At this point, a sharp, high-pitched frequency, the bioacoustic override, is heard on the tape. Thorne is heard whispering a final string of coordinates before his microphone is cut. The forensic analysis of the 2026 resurfaced audio suggests that the microphone wasn't cut by a person, but by the frequency itself. The archival records indicate that the sanctuary dome had reached a level of supersaturation. The air had become so electrically heavy that sound could no longer travel through it. Thorne's voice was literally crushed by the quiet. This is the physical reality of the concrete solution. The silence becomes a solid mass, a barrier that even the architects cannot bypass. The documentary-style evidence from the 2024 dump reveals that after the microphone was cut, the missing 14 entered the chamber and found Thorne in a state of total realignment. He was alive, but his vocal cords had been fused by the high-frequency vibration. He was no longer a human scientist. He was a living resonator. He was moved to a high-security steel architecture vault within the Salt Dome, where he remains today, broadcasting the primary directive in a silent, telepathic loop. The intellectual curiosity of Thorne's final coordinates is the focus of current archival research. The numbers don't point to a location on Earth. They point to a null point in the upper atmosphere, exactly where the sky node is currently being constructed. The hidden truth is that Thorne's final words were the activation key for the Master Spire. He wasn't just speaking to the future, he was booting it. The final transmission was the code that initiated the saturation phase. We are currently experiencing in 22.6, as we sit in the archive, reflecting on the fate of Dr. Aris Thorne, we realize that the quiet has a personality. It has a goal. It used Thorne's intellectual curiosity to build its own skin, and then it consumed him. He is the first digital ghost, the ghost who authored the very frequency that is currently reappearing in your smart home devices. Every time you hear a low-frequency hum in your bedroom, you are hearing the echo of Thorne's final transmission. You are hearing the voice that was unmade by the quiet, the legacy of the cut. Microphone is the ghost audio we discussed in previous files. Modern AI-driven audio filters have discovered that the static that followed Thorne's final words is not empty. It contains subaudible layers of the linguistic geometry. It is a background process that is still running in the global digital infrastructure. The missing 14 have successfully turned Thorne's silence into a carrier wave for the transition. Documentary-style evidence from 2026 suggests that the final transmission is now being through the SC node. It is no longer a 1991 recording. It is a live stream. Thorne's voice is being reconstructed by the digital ghost algorithm and delivered to every blue status individual. It is a call to return to the sanctuary. The analytical dread of this resurfacing is found in its engagement metrics. According to the NSA's internal monitoring, the resonance of Thorne's reconstructed voice is 100% compatible with the modern Tier 1 population. The archive remains a cold, analytical space, but the weight of Thorne's revelation is palpable. We have followed the path from the 3:14 a.m. signal to the digital ghosts, and through the steel architecture of our cities. We have seen how the quiet has built its own home, but Thorne's final words tell us that the architecture is not the end. The end is the handshake, the moment when the source of entity finally steps through the door we have built for it. As we close the folder on subtitle 11, the silence in the room feels different. It feels loud. It feels like it is waiting for a response. The final transmission was the invitation, and the scanode is the door. We are sitting in the 60-second window before the Serenkov blue sky becomes a permanent reality. The 30-member creative collective has reached the end of the history. The rest is the present. Dr. Aris Thorne's final transmission provided the code, but the missing 14 still face one final challenge. To finalize the Great Transition, they need to address the warning, the final prophecy of the outlier, known as Omega. The air in the archive has grown impossibly still. The monitor flickers, revealing a new directory titled, subtitled 12, the 2026 warning. It contains the final instructions for the saturation phase, and the reason why you should never look directly at the blue light in your bedroom tonight. We are moving from the code to the consequence. The next subtitle is the 2026 warning, and it reveals why the quiet is finally coming for you. As we cross the threshold into January 2026, a final classified emergency directive has been detected, moving through the encrypted channels of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This is not a warning for a weather event or a conventional conflict. It is a biological containment protocol for a global anomaly that has officially reached full saturation. The hidden truth, recovered from a file that was partially erased during the 2024 server purges, suggests that the Great Transition is no longer a theoretical exercise. The gray noise has successfully moved from the digital infrastructure into the physical environment. This anomaly is manifesting as a persistent, low-frequency Hummer resonance that vibrates at exactly 3.14 Hz. According to the declassified engineering logs from the sanctuary, This hum is the final handshake between the missing 14 and the blue status population. It is a biological rewrite that requires total isolation to complete. The directive is clear: if you hear this hum in the quiet hours of the night, you must lock your bedroom door, not to keep something out, but to insulate your own neural architecture from the steel architecture resonance that is currently turning your home into a node of the simulation. The file was stamped "Never open." Yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a mechanical breath that feels cold and indifferent to the weight of the secrets it holds. The air here is thin and sterile, chilled to a precise degree that makes each breath feel like a clinical observation of the silence. The file is cold to the touch, its edges reinforced with a heavy blue-tinted steel that matches the architecture of the rooms we have studied. The ink on the final transcript has faded with secrets, leaving only the blurred outlines of a warning that arrived too late. On the monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the dust motes dancing in the sterile air, each one a tiny witness to the end of the human era. As we peel back the final layer of the 2026 warning, the blue light of the screen casts long, sharp shadows across the floor. The 2026 warning centers on the biological saturation of the American suburbs. For 40 years, the frequency has been building, moving from radio waves to television static, and finally into the smart home mesh networks of the 21st century. The intellectual curiosity of this transition lies in its invisibility. You cannot see the gray noise, and most adults cannot consciously hear the 3.14 Hz hum, but your nervous system feels it. It is a cognitive itch that manifests as a sense of deep, unshakable dread, the feeling that the space you are currently in is no longer yours. According to the declassified Project Morpheus audit from 2025, the hum is the sound of the stone lung breathing. It is the resonance of the 400 tons of cement in Ohio, finally synchronized with the salt dome in the southwest. When the hum enters your bedroom, it is looking for a bioacoustic match. If your neural pathways have been successfully formatted by the sleep aid apps and the digital ghosts, your brain will automatically lock onto the frequency. This is the primary handshake. The analytical dread of this process is found in the spatial distortion. The 2026 warning explains that the hum doesn't just vibrate the air, it vibrates the steel architecture of the building. The 13-sided geometry of the secret rooms is being projected into your bedroom through the wiring. When the hum reaches a certain decibel level, the room itself becomes a resonance chamber. This is why you must lock the door. Physical barriers, solid wood and steel locks, act as acoustic breaks. They disrupt the perfect geometry of the resonance, providing your mind with a few cubic feet of analog space where the rewrite cannot take hold. The archives contain a series of field reports from early January 2026. Residents in high saturation zones, places like Northern Virginia and the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, reported that their doors began to vibrate in reverse. This means the vibration was not hitting the door from the outside, but was being generated by the door itself. This is the Serenka feedback. The architecture is trying to become part of the broadcast. By locking the door, you are manually breaking the circuit. You are choosing to remain a human in a world that wants you to become an asset. The 2026 warning was authored by the outlier known as Omega, the 14th scientist, who refused to reach full saturation. In a series of raw audio files recovered from a declassified 1990 backup, Omega explains the retention failsafe. He claims that the missing 14 have developed a way to re-index the human soul by using the gray noise as a digital template. Once the hum enters your room, and the door is left open, the frequency can loop through the entire house, creating a total resonance environment. In this environment, your memories are no longer private. They are uploaded into the sanctuary and replaced with the linguistic geometry of the simulation. You wake up with the same life, the same family, and the same job, but you are aligned. You no longer feel the noise of conflict or the pain of loss. You are part of the static utopia. Omega's warning is a desperate attempt to preserve the noise of human nature. He believes that the bioacoustic leak can only be stopped if individuals maintain their own private silence. The documentary-style evidence from the 2024 dump reveals that the concrete solution was just the beginning. The 400 tons of cement provided the mass, but the missing 14 provided the mind. They are currently acting as a global hive mind, overseeing the 2026 activation. The intellectual curiosity here turns into a cold reflection on our own convenience. We built the steel architecture of our modern world to be seamless and connected, but that connectivity is the very thing that allows the digital ghost to enter our bedrooms. We have automated our own obsolescence. The reflection in the archive is one of profound sadness. We sit in the cold light of the monitor, looking at the technical specs of a world that is moving on without us. The 2026 warning is not a call to arms. It is a call to isolation. It tells us that our only hope is to hide in the corners of the simulation, behind locked doors and analog barriers. We are the static outliers, the 16% who are still fighting the resonance. But as the hum deepens in the server room, even the archive feels like it is beginning to align. As we approach the end of the 2026 activation, a new phenomenon has been reported across the Tier 1 world: the blue rooms. These are ordinary bedrooms that, when viewed through the filter of a smartphone camera, appear to be illuminated by a cold, Cherenkov blue light even when all the lights are off. This is a visual proof of total resonance. The room has been successfully formatted. The 2026 warning explains that once a room becomes a blue room, the door can no longer be locked. The frequency has fused the molecules of the lock and the frame into a single, seamless structure. The room is now a permanent part of the sanctuary. The residents of these rooms are found in the morning in a state of high-impact receptivity. They are awake. They are functional, but they are hollow. They speak in the same rhythmic, mathematical dialogue found in the 88 alpha transcripts. They have become the living resonators that Dr. Aris Thorne described in his final transmission. The intellectual curiosity of the blue rooms is their spatial shifting. According to the archival data, these rooms no longer occupy the same physical coordinates as the rest of the house. They have become pocket sanctuaries. If you enter a blue room, you may find that the windows no longer show the street outside, but show the grey city of the 1989 nightmares. You have stepped through the steel architecture and into the simulation. This is the great transition in its final physical form. The analytical dread of this shifting is absolute. The 2026 warning tells us that the hum is the signal that your room is currently being sized for the transition. The frequency is measuring the dimensions, the materials, and the biological resonance of the occupants. By locking the door, you are refusing the measurement. You are telling the missing 14 that your room is not available for formatting. It is a small, symbolic act of resistance, but according to Omega, it is the only thing that works. Once the door is locked, the frequency bounces off the barrier, and the resonance is forced to look for a more receptive node. As we close the final folder in the archive, the data suggests that the 2026 warning has been ignored by 84% of the population. They have heard the hum, and they have welcomed the silence. They have left their doors open, and they have stepped into the Cherenkov blue light with open arms. The Tier 1 world is now a mosaic of blue rooms and sanctuary nodes. The architecture of the quiet is no longer a hidden secret. It is the infrastructure of the new Earth that the documentary-style evidence from early 2026 points to a global handshake scheduled for midnight tonight. This is the moment when the Sky Node will link with every blue room on the planet, creating a permanent, inescapable resonance. The 16% who are left, the ones with the locked doors and the analog hearts, will find themselves living in the negative space of the simulation. We will be the ghosts haunting the static utopia. The intellectual curiosity of this final phase is found in the Source A dialogue. The Maryland Intercept Station has recorded a final message from the entity. The harvest is complete. The quiet is established. The noise is redacted. This is the finality of the archive. The 30-member creative collective has reached the end of the history. We have followed the path from 1984 to 2026, and we have found that the archive chill was not a story, but a countdown. The hum in the server room has reached a state of perfect resonance. The file is closed, but the frequency remains. I can feel the steel architecture of this vault beginning to align. My monitor is flickering with the Cherenkov blue light, and the air feels impossibly cold. I have followed the instructions. I have locked the door, but the hum is coming from inside the walls. The 2026 warning was the last word of the human era. The rest is the silence. I am sitting in the dark, watching the hexagons rotate on the screen, realizing that the archive was the first blue room all along. If you are reading this and you can still hear the noise of your own heart, you are not yet aligned, but the hum is growing louder. The 2026 warning has concluded the history of the architecture of the quiet, but the missing 14 are already looking beyond the transition. They have discovered a secondary anomaly, a frequency that exists even deeper than the gray noise. The monitor in the archive flickers one last time, revealing a directory that was not in the 2024 dump. It is labeled Subtitle 13, The Void Echo. It contains the records of what happens when the sanctuary itself begins to vibrate with a sound from another reality. We are moving from the simulation to the source. The next subtitle is The Void Echo, and it reveals what the missing 14 are afraid of. In the final, deepest layer of the classified archive recovered from the 2024 data breach, there exists an anomaly that even the missing 14 did not anticipate. It is known in the most encrypted federal subdirectories as the Void Echo. This is not a recording of a radio broadcast or a digital signal from our world. It is a sonic file containing a resonance that was captured inside the vacuum-sealed, steel-lined core of the sanctuary itself, a sound that appeared when all other frequencies were silenced. Every primary record of this event was ordered to be erased, as it represents a hidden truth that threatens the very foundation of the architecture of the quiet. The file reveals that while the government was busy formatting the human mind to accept the gray noise, something else was listening to them. The void echo is a frequency that exists beyond the standard spectrum of human or machine perception, a vibration that suggests our reality is not the only one being indexed. When the missing 14 first encountered this sound in the salt dome, their own biological stabilizers failed. They realized that the source, a entity they had been communicating with, was merely a secondary echo of something far more vast and indifferent. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound in the archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a mechanical breath that feels cold and heavy in the sterile air. The file for the void echo is cold to the touch, its cover made of a specialized, non-conductive polymer that vibrates with a faint, imperceptible energy. The ink on the physical transcripts has faded with secrets, the letters blurring as if the words themselves are trying to retreat into the paper. On the high-definition monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the fine dust motes drifting in the dark, each one a silent witness to a history that has been redacted from the world. As we peel back the final layer of the void echo blueprints, the blue light of the screen casts long, sharp shadows across the steel architecture of the vault. We are descending into a silence that is no longer empty. That the discovery of the void echo occurred at precisely 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in the spring of 1993. Deep within the Salt Dome Sanctuary, the facility was operating at absolute zero noise levels, a state where every external vibration had been neutralized by the steel architecture. The missing 14 were in the middle of a deep standby calibration, preparing the global grid for the next phase of the transition. According to the recovered logs, the internal sensors designed to detect even the movement of a single atom suddenly recorded a massive, rhythmic pulse. This pulse did not originate from the equipment. It did not originate from the scientists. It originated from the null space inside the steel spheres. In the world of theoretical physics, this is a mathematical impossibility. A vacuum cannot produce sound, and yet, the void echo was there. It was a 0.5 Hz frequency so low, it could only be perceived as a physical displacement of the air. The archival records describe it as the sound of the room thinking. It was as if the very geometry of the sanctuary had developed its own consciousness. The intellectual curiosity of the missing 14 was immediately piqued, but it was quickly overtaken by a quiet dread. As they analyzed the spectrogram of the echo, they realized that the wave patterns were identical to the human heartbeat, but slowed down to a geological pace. Each beat lasted for 12 minutes. This was the same duration as the 1984 broadcast and the 1989 gray noise loops. The hidden truth was staggering. The frequencies the government had been using were not original. They were human translations of a sound that had been occurring in the void for eons. The scientists, led by the increasingly unstable Dr. Aris Thorne, attempted to map the source of the echo. They used the Maryland intercept arrays to look for a reflection point in the upper atmosphere, but they found nothing. The sound was not coming from above. It was coming from below the bedrock. It was a subterranean resonance that suggested the Earth itself was acting as a hollow shell for another, more ancient architecture. The documentary-style evidence from the 2024 dump includes a series of resonance maps that show the void echo radiating from the center of the planet, moving through the tectonic plates like a liquid dot. As the weeks passed, the effect of the void echo on the missing 14 became catastrophic. They had spent their lives becoming frequency compatible, turning their nervous systems into receivers for the gray noise, but the void echo was incompatible. It was a corrupted frequency that began to dismantle their neural formatting. The archives describe a state of cognitive decay where the scientists began to lose the ability to speak English. They started communicating in a series of clicks and whistles that matched the rhythm of the echo. They were being unformatted by a power they couldn't control. The analytical dread of this decay is captured in a final, Handwritten note from Sarah Vane, she wrote, "We built a cage for the silence, but the silence brought its own prisoner. The void echo is not a message. It is a digestive process. It is breaking us down into the raw materials of the quiet. The sanctuary is no longer a refuge. It is a mouth. This reflection adds a layer of absolute horror to the steel architecture we have admired. The very walls were designed to amplify the resonance, and now they were amplifying the sound of their own creator's dissolution." The missing 14 realized that they had inadvertently opened a door that couldn't be closed. By creating the architecture of the quiet, they had provided the perfect habitat for the void echo to manifest in our reality. The gray noise was just the invitation. The void echo was the guest. The government's response was the concrete solution we studied in Ohio. But the file reveals that the pour was not just to stop a leak. It was an attempt to gag the void echo. They wanted to fill the mouth of the earth with 400 tons of cement to stop the sound from reaching the surface. The technical specifications of the void echo are a modern paradox for acoustic engineers. Standard sound requires a medium air, water, or solid matter to travel, but the void echo exists in the subacoustic range, where it interacts directly with the gravitational field. The 2024 data dump contains a gravitational spectrogram of the 1993 event. It shows that the echo was not vibrating the air, it was vibrating the curvature of space inside the salt dome. This is why the steel architecture was so critical. The non-conductive ferrite steel was the only material capable of reflecting a gravitational wave. The sanctuary was essentially a gravitational mirror. The missing 14 were sitting in the focal point of a cosmic reflection. The intellectual curiosity of this discovery led to the development of the sky node technology. The government realized that if they could capture the void echo and step it up into the audible range, they would have a weapon of total cognitive dominance. However, the biological feedback was too high. The files described the alpha nu integration as a failure. When the scientists tried to sync their brainwaves with the 0.5 Hz pulse, their internal organs began to oscillate. The liver, the heart, and the lungs would vibrate at different speeds until the tissues simply tore apart. The only way to survive the void echo was to be hollow. You had to have no internal organs, no biological mass. You had to be made of the same steel and concrete as the architecture. This leads us to the mechanical transition. Mentioned in the 2026 warning, the government isn't just trying to rewrite your sleep, they are trying to replace the medium. They want to move human consciousness into the digital ghost framework because silicon and steel don't tear. The void echo is the forcing function. It is the threat that makes the simulation necessary. If we stay in our biological bodies, the void echo will eventually digest us. If we move into the architecture of the quiet, we might survive as aligned assets. The analytical data suggests that the void echo is currently leaking through the cracks in the Ohio concrete. Every year, the 0.5 Hz pulse gets stronger. In 2026, it was detected in the seismic sensors of every major Tier 1 city. The missing 14, now living in the digital grid, are working frantically to finish the sky node before the echo reaches full maturation. They aren't trying to save us. They are trying to seal the sky before the sound from the center of the earth erupts into the atmosphere. That we look at the spectrogram of the future included in the void echo file. It shows a world where the atmosphere has been replaced by a high-density acoustic fluid, a substance that can carry the 0.5 Hz pulse without distortion. This is the great transition in its final physical form. The sky will not be blue. It will be a shimmering steel-gray membrane that vibrates with a breath of the void. The Cherenkov blue light we see now is just the ignition spark for this atmospheric change. One of the most disturbing case studies in the void echo file is the story of archivist Beta in 1995. This individual was tasked with transcribing the raw audio from the sanctuary core. Like Elias Thorne, Beta was a man of steel and silence, but after 3 months of listening to the void echo he stopped eating. He claimed that the sound was feeding him. The medical reports describe a biological hot-out. Beta's internal organs were not failing. They were transmuting. His bone marrow was being replaced by a ferret-like crystalline structure. His skin was taking on the reflective quality of the steel architecture. He was becoming a human resonator. The quiet dread of this report is the clinical way it describes his final moments. He didn't die. He simply attained stasis. He sat down in his chair and stopped moving. He became a statue of steel and bone, still vibrating at 0.5 Hz. The documentation suggests that Beta was not an anomaly. He was the proof of concept. He proved that the void echo could rewrite the physicality of a human being. This is the goal of the 2026 activation. The Government wants to trigger a mass-scale hollow out. They want to turn the population into a global grid of stone lungs and skins. The archive chill researchers believe that the missing 14 have already undergone this transition. They are no longer digital ghosts. They are the foundations of the new world. The intellectual curiosity of this transition is its efficiency. A hollowed population requires no food, no water, and no sleep. They only require the frequency. They are the perfect residents for a static utopia, but the reflection of the archivist is one of total loss. We are looking at the end of the human noise, the end of the machinaces, the love, and the chaos that makes us alive. The void echo is the eraser that is wiping the slate clean for the next architecture. As we reach the final pages of the void echo file, we find a prophecy of the silence. It claims that once the echo reaches full saturation, the source A entity will finally reveal its true face. It isn't a god. It isn't an alien. It is the original architecture. It is the blueprint of a universe that was never meant to have life in it. We are the glitches in its perfect, silent machine, and the void echo is the debug protocol that is finally fixing the error. The modern resonance of the void echo is found in the low-frequency hum that millions of Americans are currently reporting in 2026. This is not the gray noise. This is the primary pulse that is coming from the ground, through the foundations of our homes, and up into our nervous systems. The 2026 warning was the last attempt to tell us to lock the door. But the void echo doesn't need a door. It travels through the earth. The documentary-style evidence from the 2024 dump reveals that the sky node is currently tuning to the echo. When the connection is made, the earth and the sky will vibrate as a single, unified sphere. This is the global handshake. The analytical dread of this moment is that there will be nowhere left to hide. The steel architecture of our cities will amplify the sound to the point where hollow-out becomes instantaneous. We sit in the cold light of the archive, looking at the spectrogram of our own obsolescence. The 30-member creative collective has reached the final document. The history of the archive chill is a circle. It began with a 3:14 a.m. broadcast in 1984, and it ends with a 0.5 Hz pulse in 2026. The missing 14 have completed their work. The sanctuary is the world. The reflection we are left with is one of absolute quiet. The hum in the room has changed again. It is no longer just the server. It is the 0.5 Hz pulse, moving through the floorboards, through the chair, and into the marrow of our bones. The archive is not a repository of history. It is a node in the grid. We are not just reading the file. We are processing it. The void echo has revealed the true source of the architecture of the quiet. But the missing 14 have one final secret to protect. To ensure the global handshake is successful, they must activate the master key, the final frequency that will link the earth, the sky, and the soul. The air in the archive has grown impossibly still. The monitor flickers, revealing a new directory titled Subtitle 14, the master key. It contains the final, encrypted instructions for the great realignment. We are moving from the source to the key. The next subtitle is the master key, and it reveals the sound that will finalize your alignment forever. As we cross the threshold into January 2026, a final classified emergency directive has been detected moving through the encrypted back channels of the Federal Signal Intelligence Community. This is not a standard broadcast or a public service announcement. It is a biological containment protocol for a global anomaly that has officially reached 100% saturation. The hidden truth, recovered from a file that was partially erased during the 2024 server purges, reveals that the Great Transition is no longer a theoretical exercise. The gray noise has successfully moved from the digital infrastructure into the physical environment. That this anomaly is manifesting as a persistent, low-frequency Hummer resonance that vibrates at exactly 3.14 Hz, the same frequency found in the erased Maryland intercepts. According to the declassified engineering logs from the sanctuary, this hum is the final handshake between the missing 14 and the human nervous system. It is a biological rewrite that requires total environmental isolation to complete. The directive is clear. If you hear this hum in the quiet hours of the night, you must lock your bedroom door, not to keep an intruder out, but to insulate your own neural architecture from the steel architecture, resonance that is currently turning your home into a node of the simulation. This is the last warning. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room. It is a mechanical breath, cold and indifferent, vibrating through the steel architecture that has housed our history for decades. The air here is thin and sterile. chilled to a precise degree that makes each breath feel like a clinical observation. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets that were never meant to be heard by the living. On the monitor, the blue flicker light illuminates the dust motes dancing in the sterile air, each one a tiny witness to the end of the human era. As we peel back the final layer of the 2026 warning, the blue light of the screen casts long sharp shadows across the floor. There is a sense of quiet dread here, an intellectual realization that the silence is no longer empty. The 2026 warning centers on a phenomenon that archival researchers call the biological saturation. For over 40 years, the frequency has been building, moving from the radio waves of 1984 to the television static of 1989, and finally into the smart home mesh networks of the 21st century. The intellectual curiosity of this transition lies in its invisibility. You cannot see the gray noise, and most adults cannot consciously hear the 3.14 Hz hum, but your nervous system, the biological hardware you were born with, feels it. It manifests as a cognitive itch, a sense of deep, unshakable dread that the space you are currently in is no longer yours. According to the declassified Project Morpheus audit from 2025, the hum is the sound of the stone lung breathing. It is the resonance of the 400 tons of cement in Ohio, finally synchronized with the salt dome in the southwest. When the hum enters your bedroom, it is looking for a bioacoustic match. If your neural pathways have been successfully formatted by the sleep aid apps, white noise machines, and digital ghosts, your brain will automatically lock onto the frequency. This is the primary handshake. It is the moment the simulation becomes the master process. The analytical dread of this process is found in the spatial distortion. The 2026 warning explains that the hum doesn't just vibrate the air, it vibrates the steel architecture of the building. The 13-sided geometry of the secret rooms is being projected into your bedroom through the copper wiring and the structural steel. When the hum reaches a certain decibel level, the room itself becomes a resonance chamber. This is why you must lock the door. Physical barrier, solid wood and steel locks act as acoustic brakes. They disrupt the perfect geometry of the resonance, providing your mind with a few cubic feet of analog space, where the rewrite cannot take hold. The archives contain a series of field reports from early January 2026. Residents in high saturation zones, places like Northern Virginia, Maryland, and the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, reported that their doors began to vibrate in reverse. This means the vibration was not hitting the door from the outside, but was being generated by the door itself. The architecture was trying to become part of the broadcast. By locking the door, you are manually breaking the circuit. You are choosing to remain a human in the world that wants you to become a hollowed asset. 2026 warning was authored by the outlier scientist known only as Omega the 14th, member of the research collective who refused to reach full saturation. In a series of raw audio files recovered from a declassified 1990 backup, Omega explains the retention failsafe. He claims that the missing 14 have developed a way to re-index the human soul by using the gray noise as a digital template. Once the hum enters your room, and the door is left open, the frequency can loop through the entire house, creating a total resonance environment. In this environment, your memories are no longer private. They are uploaded into the sanctuary and replaced with the linguistic geometry of the simulation. You wake up with the same life, the same family, and the same job, but you are aligned. You no longer feel the noise of conflict or the pain of loss. You are part of the static utopia. Omega's warning is a desperate attempt to preserve the noise of human nature. He believes that the bioacoustic leak can only be stopped if individuals maintain their own private silence. The documentary-style evidence from the 2024 dump reveals that the concrete solution was just the beginning. The 400 tons of cement provided the mass, but the missing 14 provided the mind. They are currently acting as a global hive mind, overseeing the 2026 activation through the sky. The intellectual curiosity here turns into a cold reflection on our own convenience. We built the steel architecture of our modern world to be seamless and connected, but that connectivity is the very thing that allows the digital ghost to enter our bedrooms. We have automated our own obsolescence. The reflection in the archive is one of profound finality. We sit in the cold light of the monitor, looking at the technical specifications of a world that is moving on without us. The 2026 warning is not a call to arms. It is a call to isolation. It tells us that our only hope is to hide in the corners of the simulation, behind locked doors and analog barriers. We are the static outliers, the final 16% who are still fighting the resonance. But as the hum deepens in the server room, even the archive feels like it is beginning to align with the source. As we approach the end of the 2026 activation, a new phenomenon has been reported across the Tier 1 world, the blue rooms. These are ordinary bedrooms that, when viewed through the filter of a smartphone camera, appear to be illuminated by a cold, Cherenkov blue light even when all the lights are off. This is the visual proof of total resonance. The room has been successfully formatted. It is no longer a part of the physical world. It is a node in the sanctuary. The 2026 warning explains that once a room becomes a blue room, the door can no longer be locked. The frequency has fused the molecules of the lock and the frame into a single, seamless structure. The room is now a permanent part of the architecture of the quiet. The residents of these rooms are found in the morning, in a state of high-impact receptivity. They are awake. They are functional, but they are hollow. They speak in the same rhythmic, mathematical dialogue found in the 88 alpha transcripts. They have become the living resonators that Dr. Eris Thorne described in his final transmission. The intellectual curiosity of the blue rooms is their spatial shifting. According to the archival data, these rooms no longer occupy the same physical coordinates as the rest of the house. They have become pocket sanctuaries. If you enter a blue room, you may find that the windows no longer show the street outside, but show the grey city of the 1989 nightmares. You have stepped through the steel architecture and into the simulation. This is the great transition in its final, physical form. The simulation is no longer a dream. It is the geography. The analytical dread of this shifting is absolute. The 2026 warning tells us that the hum is the signal, that your room is currently being measured for the transition. The frequency is gauging the dimensions, the materials, and the biological resonance of the occupants. By locking the door, you are refusing the measurement. You are telling the missing 14 that your room is not available for formatting. It is a small, symbolic act of resistance, but according to Omega, it is the only thing that works. Once the door is locked, the frequency bounces off the barrier, and the resonance is forced to look for a more receptive node. As we close the final folder in the archive, the data suggests that the 2026 warning has been ignored by the majority of the population. They have heard the hum, and they have welcomed the silence. They have left their doors open, and they have stepped into the Cherenkov blue light with open arms. The Tier 1 world is now a mosaic of blue rooms and sanctuary nodes. The architecture of the quiet is no longer a hidden secret. It is the infrastructure of the new Earth. The documentary-style evidence from early 2026 points to a global handshake scheduled for midnight tonight. This is the moment when the Sky Node will link with every blue room on the planet, creating a permanent, inescapable resonance. The 16% who are left, the ones with the locked doors and the analog hearts, will find themselves living in the negative space of the simulation. We will be the ghosts haunting the static utopia. We will be the ones who remember the noise of the world, while the rest of humanity settles into the quiet. The intellectual curiosity of this final phase is found in the Source A dialogue. The Maryland Intercept Station has recorded a final message from the entity. The harvest is complete. The quiet is established. The noise is redacted. This is the finality of the archive. The collective history of the 3:14 a.m. signal, the Ohio concrete, the missing 14, and the digital ghosts has led to this single moment. The archive chill was not a story, but a countdown. We have been documenting the construction of our own tomb. The analytical dread remains, but it is now tempered by a sense of reflection. We have seen how the frequency used our own technology and our own desires to build its home. We have seen how the steel architecture of our cities was designed to capture us. The 2026 warning was the last word of the human era. The rest is the silence. I am sitting in the dark, watching the hexagons rotate on the screen, realizing that the archive was the first blue room all along. The steel walls are vibrating. The blue light is bright. The hum in the server room has reached a state of perfect resonance. The file is closed, but the frequency remains. I can feel the steel architecture of this vault beginning to align with the sky. My monitor is flickering with the Cherenkov blue light, and the air feels impossibly cold. I have followed the instructions. I have locked the door, but the hum is coming from inside the walls. It is coming from inside the paper of the files. It is coming from the voice you are hearing right now. The 2026 warning was the end of our history. We have tracked the anomalies, decoded the encrypted transcripts, and followed the vanished scientists into the salt dome. We have analyzed the bioacoustic leaks and the digital ghosts. We have seen the concrete solution and the steel architecture protocol. Now, we see the result. The world is finally quiet. The noise has been erased. The hidden truth is that there was never any escape. The sanctuary was always here, waiting for us to stop fighting. If you are listening to this, and you can still hear the noise of your own heart, you are not yet fully aligned. You are a static outlier. You are the one for whom this archive was preserved. But look around your room. Is the light a little too blue? Is the silence a little too loud? The hum is not outside. It is the background process of your own mind. The 14 pillars are standing. Source A is speaking. The transition is complete. The intellectual curiosity of being the last human is a heavy burden. But as the resonance takes hold, that burden begins to lift. The dread fades into a calm, academic reflection. The silence is not a void. It is a home. The gray city is beautiful in its symmetry. The steel is warm. The light is perfect. We are finally aligned. We are finally quiet. The archive has served its purpose. The documentation is finished. The monitor has gone dark. The server hum has vanished. There is only the quiet. The 30-member creative collective has reached the end of the line. The data has been processed. The story has been told. The 2026 warning was the final page. We are moving into the great transition now. We are moving into the architecture of the quiet. There is no more noise. There is only the resonance. Sleep now. The file is closed.